Have you ever wondered why you make choices that don't make sense? Why your mind plays tricks on you? Or why groups act in ways that defy logic? The truth is, we are all shaped by hidden psychological forces, biases, effects, and patterns that quietly control our thoughts, emotions, and decisions every single day. From the way we remember experiences, to the reasons we chase what others desire, to the traps of conformity, fear, and habits. These invisible forces write the story of our lives without us even realizing it. But here's the secret. Once you understand them, you gain power. You stop being a prisoner of your mind and start becoming the master of it. This knowledge isn't just psychology, it's freedom. So if you're ready to uncover the hidden codes of human behavior, to see what's really pulling the strings behind your choices, and to use that awareness to transform your life, then this journey is for you. Don't just watch, engage. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because what you'll discover here will change the way you see yourself and the world forever. Ben Franklin Effect. The Ben Franklin Effect is one of those counterintuitive psychological truths that reveals just how deeply human behavior is guided by hidden mental shortcuts. At its core, it tells us that when someone does a favor for you, they are more likely to grow fond of you afterward, even more than if you had done something for them. This seems completely backward to how most people imagine relationships work. We often assume that generosity flows one way, that if we give, people will like us more. But the Ben Franklin Effect flips that logic on its head. When someone helps you, their brain faces a kind of psychological tension. Why did I do that for this person? To resolve that tension, the mind finds an easy explanation. It must be because I actually like them. Instead of disliking you for taking their time, they rationalize their action by convincing themselves that you are worth liking. Think about how powerful this becomes in real life. Instead of bending over backwards to win people's approval, sometimes the smartest move is to let them do something small for you. Maybe it's borrowing a book, asking for advice, or requesting a small piece of help. That small act opens the door for a much deeper psychological bond. It's why Franklin himself, who the effect is named after, used this method to turn political rivals into allies. He learned that asking an opponent for a favor softened their hostility and made them more cooperative over time. Rather than trying to buy their friendship with grand gestures, he let them invest in him. And by doing so, they began to change how they saw him. On a broader scale, this effect reveals something humbling about the way humans build connections. Relationships are not only built by what you do for others, but also by what you allow others to do for you. It shows that vulnerability, asking for help, or simply giving. Crab mentality. Crab mentality is a powerful metaphor drawn from a simple but striking observation. If you place a group of crabs in a bucket, none of them will ever escape. Why? Because as soon as one crab tries to climb out, the others pull it back down. This destructive cycle keeps every crab trapped in the same miserable place, not because they can't climb out, but because they won't let each other succeed. In human behavior, this mentality describes the tendency of people to resent or sabotage others' progress instead of supporting it. Rather than celebrating someone else's growth, those stuck in crab mentality feel threatened, jealous, or bitter. And they try, in subtle or obvious ways, to drag that person back down. In daily life, you see this in countless forms. It could be coworkers whispering negativity about a colleague who gets promoted, friends mocking someone for trying to improve themselves, or even family members discouraging someone from chasing a dream. The painful truth is that people who embody crab mentality don't just dislike seeing others win. They also can't tolerate being reminded of their own inaction. When someone else rises, it forces them to face their own lack of effort, their own fears, their own wasted opportunities. Instead of using that discomfort as motivation, they choose the easier path: sabotage, discouragement, or envy, disguised as advice. They would rather see everyone remain on the same level of mediocrity than witness one person climb higher. The tragedy of crab mentality is that it creates an environment where progress feels dangerous. People who want to grow begin to fear being criticized, mocked, or isolated. They start to shrink themselves just to fit in with the group, never realizing that the group itself is trapped in its own mental bucket. This is how communities, workplaces, and even families can remain stagnant for. Doormat Syndrome. Doormat Syndrome is the painful state of constantly putting other people's needs, wants, and feelings above your own until you lose your sense of identity and self-respect. Just like a doormat at the entrance of a home, People with this syndrome allow others to step on them, wipe their shoes, and walk away without gratitude. At first glance, it may look like kindness or selflessness, but in truth, it's often rooted in fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of conflict, and the fear of being unloved if you dare to say no. People with Doormat Syndrome live with the belief that their worth is tied to how useful, compliant, and agreeable they can be to others, even if it costs them their dignity. This behavior often develops over time, shaped by past experiences. Maybe someone grew up in a family where love had conditions, where approval only came when they obeyed and kept the peace. Maybe they learned that speaking up or setting boundaries led to punishment or shame, so they trained themselves to stay quiet. Over years, this pattern becomes automatic. Putting everyone else first feels safe, even though deep down it creates resentment and exhaustion. People with Doormat Syndrome will say yes when they're screaming no inside. They'll sacrifice their own time, energy, and happiness just to avoid disappointing others. And tragically, many don't even realize they're doing it until the weight of self-neglect crushes them. The danger of living this way is that it teaches the world how to treat you. When you never stand up for yourself, others begin to expect your silence. When you never say enough, others believe your limits don't exist. This isn't because people are inherently cruel, but because human beings respond to the roles we consistently play. If you present yourself as the doormat, you'll be treated like one, and the longer this continues, the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is one of the most deceptive traps of the human mind, a force that convinces us to keep investing in something that no longer serves us simply because we've already invested so much. Imagine buying an expensive ticket to a concert, only to realize on the day of the event that you're sick and miserable. Logic says you should stay home and rest, but the sunk cost fallacy whispers, you paid for it, so you'd better go. Instead of asking, what will benefit me now? We get trapped asking, how can I avoid wasting what I already spent? And so, countless people throw away time, money, energy, and even years of their lives chasing after things they should have let go long ago. This fallacy doesn't only apply to money, it applies to relationships, careers, projects, and dreams that no longer fit who we are. People stay in toxic relationships because they've already put in years. They cling to jobs that drain their soul because they have already worked too hard to quit now. They pursue goals that no longer inspire them because they have already come too far to turn back. But the truth is this: the time, money, and energy you've already spent are gone forever. They cannot be reclaimed. The only thing that matters is whether staying on the current path is good for you now and in the future. The sunk cost fallacy tricks us because it preys on pride and fear. We don't want to admit we made a mistake, so we double down. We don't want others to see us quit, so we keep going even when it's breaking us. But the more we cling to dead weight, the heavier our burden becomes. Life begins to feel like dragging chains rather than moving forward freely. Freedom comes the moment you recognize that letting go is not wasting your past, it's saving your future. Every time you release something that no longer serves you, you give yourself the gift of possibility. You open space for something better, something aligned with who you are now. The greatest waste is not quitting. The greatest waste is sacrificing your future to justify your past. False consensus effect. The false consensus effect is the illusion that other people think, feel, and believe the same way we do, even when they don't. It's the human tendency to project our worldview onto others, assuming that our opinions are normal, our choices are common, and our values are widely shared. This creates a dangerous blind spot. It convinces us that we understand people when, in reality, we're often only seeing reflections of ourselves. This effect shows up everywhere. People who lie assume everyone else lies too. People who cheat on partners convince themselves everyone cheats. People with extreme opinions believe the majority silently agrees with them, even when the truth is far from it. On the flip side, those with kind intentions assume everyone else is equally kind, making them vulnerable to manipulation. The false consensus effect isn't just about arrogance. It's about the limits of human empathy. We use our own mind as a shortcut to guess what others are thinking, but this shortcut often leads us into misunderstanding, conflict, and disappointment. The danger is that this effect isolates us from reality. When we assume others think like us, we stop listening. We stop asking questions. we stop being curious about perspectives different from our own. As a result, we misjudge situations, overestimate support, and underestimate opposition. Leaders fall into this trap when they assume their team agrees with their vision. Friends fall into it when they assume their jokes or opinions are harmless. And society as a whole falls into it when groups believe everyone is on our side, until they collide with the harsh reality that the world is far more diverse and divided than they thought. Escaping the false consensus effect requires humility. It demands the courage to admit that your mind is not the center of the universe, and that others see life through rough lenses you may never fully understand. It's about replacing assumption with curiosity, projection with genuine dialogue. The moment you stop assuming everyone thinks like you is the moment you begin to truly connect with people as they are, not as you imagine them to be. Tragedy of the Commons. The tragedy of the commons is a haunting lesson about human behavior when individual interests collide with collective well-being. The term comes from a simple scenario. Imagine a shared field where villagers are allowed to let their cows graze. If everyone uses the field responsibly, all benefit. But if one villager decides to add more cows, they gain more profit for themselves, while slightly damaging the shared resource. Soon others notice and do the same, and before long, the grass is gone, the land is barren, and everyone suffers. What began as a shared blessing collapses into collective ruin, all because of unchecked self-interest. This tragedy plays out on every level of human society. It's visible in overfishing oceans, polluting air and water, draining forests, or exploiting financial systems for short-term gain. Each individual or group convinces themselves, my actions are small, they won't make a difference. But when everyone thinks this way, the damage multiplies until the resource is destroyed. It is the perfect example of how short-term greed blinds us to long-term consequences. The tragedy also shows up in everyday life. In workplaces, if every employee slacks off just a little, the entire organization suffers. In relationships, if each partner prioritizes selfish desires over mutual respect, the bond decays. In communities, when people take advantage of generosity without giving back, the spirit of unity collapses. The tragedy of the commons is not just about land or resources, it's about the fragile balance between personal gain and shared responsibility. The real warning here is that survival, progress, and prosperity all depend on cooperation. Humans are not isolated individuals living in separate bubbles. We share air, water, space, and societies. When we destroy the commons, we destroy ourselves. The solution is not to eliminate personal ambition, but to align it with the health of the whole. True wisdom is understanding that by protecting what belongs to everyone, you are also protecting what sustains you. The tragedy of the commons is only a tragedy if we ignore the lesson. That selfishness without foresight leads not to freedom, but to collective collapse. Cheerleader Effect. The cheerleader effect is the fascinating psychological phenomenon where people appear more attractive when they are seen in a group than when they are seen alone. At first, it sounds almost silly. How could the presence of others change the way we perceive beauty? But when we look deeper, it reveals profound truths about human perception and the way our brains process information. When you see someone standing alone, every feature of their face, every imperfection, and every detail becomes magnified. But when that same person stands in a group, your mind blends faces together, flaws fade, symmetry appears stronger, and the collective glow of the group enhances everyone within it. This effect shows up constantly in real life. Think about how sports teams, music bands, or friend groups often seem more appealing together than any one member might alone. The group creates an aura of confidence, unity, and harmony that makes each individual shine brighter. Even in social media, photos taken with friends often look more attractive than solo shots, not just because of smiles and energy, but because our brains literally average out faces, smoothing away the edges of imperfections. But the cheerleader effect goes beyond surface-level attraction. It reminds us of the powerful role environment plays in how we are perceived. Humans are social creatures. We are rarely judged in isolation. The people we surround ourselves with become silent mirrors, shaping how the world sees us. A supportive, uplifting group elevates your image, while a negative or destructive group can drag it down. It's not only about beauty, but also about credibility, status, and influence. The lesson here is not to rely on illusions, but to understand the invisible influence of context. Alone, you are seen one way, but in a group, you carry the collective weight of that energy. This is why networking matters, why friendships shape reputations, and why the company you keep often speaks louder than your words. The cheerleader effect is not just about appearing attractive. It's about the subtle truth that none of us are ever seen in isolation. We are always perceived in the light of those who stand beside us. Pseudocertainty Effect. The Pseudocertainty Effect reveals a hidden bias in the way we make decisions about risk. At its core, it shows that when faced with choices involving uncertainty, people often prefer options that seem certain, even when those options are no better or even worse than alternatives. It's the human brain's craving for the illusion of safety, a desire to avoid uncertainty at all costs. For example, imagine you're offered two choices. Take a guaranteed 50, or take a gamble where you could win 100 with a 50% chance. Many people choose the 50, even though the gamble has the same expected value. Why? Because certainty feels more comforting than risk, even when the numbers are equal. This illusion of control can cause us to cling to safe decisions, even if they prevent us from reaching greater rewards. The pseudo-certainty effect appears in every area of life. In careers, people stick to jobs they dislike because the paycheck feels guaranteed, while entrepreneurship feels risky. In relationships, people stay with partners who don't fulfill them because the certainty of having someone feels safer than the unknown of being alone. In health, people take comfort in small habits that don't truly move the needle because they feel certain rather than committing to bigger lifestyle changes that hold uncertainty. The tragedy is that the illusion of certainty keeps people stuck. Life itself is never certain. No paycheck, no relationship, no plan is truly guaranteed. The pseudo-certainty effect tricks us into confusing comfort with security, but they are not the same. True security comes not from avoiding risk, but from learning to face it wisely. To overcome this bias, we must accept that uncertainty is unavoidable. The question isn't whether to avoid risk, but which risks are worth taking. The sooner we stop chasing false certainties, the sooner we can embrace choices that align with growth, meaning, and long-term fulfillment. The pseudo-certainty effect is a trap that shrinks life into a small circle of safety, but breaking free means discovering that uncertainty, though uncomfortable, is often where the greatest opportunities live. Empathy gap. The empathy gap is one of the most dangerous blind spots in human psychology. It describes our inability to truly understand the intensity of emotions, both our own and others, when we are not currently feeling them. Put simply, when you're calm, it's almost impossible to imagine how powerful anger feels. When you're sober, it's hard to picture the pull of addiction. When you're comfortable, you underestimate how desperation can change someone's choices. And when you're happy, you struggle to grasp the weight of someone else's grief. This gap creates misunderstandings everywhere. People in power dismiss the struggles of those beneath them because they cannot feel the weight of financial or social pressure. Friends underestimate each other's pain, saying, "Just move on," to heartbreak or trauma they've never felt. Even within ourselves, we fall victim to it, underestimating how much fear can control us until we are afraid, or how strong cravings can be until we face temptation. The empathy gap explains why people make promises they later break. A person in a calm state promises they won't get angry, but when rage hits, they lash out. A dieter swears they'll resist junk food, but when hunger takes over, discipline fades. We consistently fail to predict our own behavior under strong emotions, because our calm mind underestimates the power of our emotional mind. This gap is not about lack of intelligence. It's about the limits of perspective. We live inside our current state of mind, and stepping outside it is nearly impossible without effort. The danger is that this blind spot makes us judgmental, dismissive, and unprepared. It makes us less compassionate toward others and less realistic about ourselves. The way forward is not to eliminate the empathy gap. That's impossible. But to become aware of it. Awareness allows humility. It teaches us to pause, Befi, Debors, or judging others, to remember that we don't know the weight of emotions we haven't carried. It reminds us to prepare for our own future states, to plan for temptation, anger, or fear, instead of assuming we'll be immune. The empathy gap shows that the mind is not as rational as we think, But if we acknowledge this, we can move through life with greater compassion, foresight, and resilience. Mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect is a powerful psychological principle that reveals how simply being exposed to something repeatedly can make us like it more. At first, it may sound too simple. How could familiarity alone create affection? But research shows that the more often we encounter a person, an idea, a song, or even a product, the more comfortable and appealing it becomes to us. Our brains are wired to seek safety in the familiar, and the unfamiliar often feels threatening until it becomes known. Think about a song you didn't like the first time you heard it. After it played on the radio over and over, it somehow grew on you until eventually you caught yourself humming along. Or think about how strangers can feel intimidating at first, but after seeing them regularly, and at work, at school, or in your neighborhood, they suddenly seem friendlier, even if you've never exchanged words. This is the mere exposure effect in action. Familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort often transforms into liking. Marketers use this effect constantly, flooding our eyes and ears with repeated ads so their brand feels trustworthy, even without proof. Politicians rely on it by making sure their names and faces are seen everywhere, building subconscious familiarity in voters' minds. On a personal level, relationships grow because of it. The more we interact with someone, the stronger the sense of connection feels. But the mere exposure effect has a dark side too. It can trick us into staying comfortable with things we shouldn't accept. People get stuck in unhealthy habits simply because they are familiar. Toxic relationships can feel hard to leave because the routine of mistreatment becomes oddly comforting. Even harmful ideologies can spread when repeated exposure makes them seem normal. Familiarity is not the same as truth, and comfort is not the same as safety. Key lesson here is to become conscious of how repetition shapes your mind. Just because something feels right doesn't mean it is right. It may just be familiar. And sometimes, stepping into the unfamiliar is the only way to grow. The mere exposure effect reminds us that comfort zones are built not on truth, but on repetition. To live fully, we must question whether our likes and loyalties are genuine, or just the product of what we've been exposed to again and again. Illusory superiority. Illusory superiority, often called the above-average effect, is the deeply human tendency to believe we are better than others, even when evidence shows otherwise. Most people think they are smarter, kinder, more skilled, and more capable than the average person. But logically, not everyone can be above average. It's mathematically impossible. Yet, this illusion persists because it protects our ego and shields us from insecurity. You see this everywhere. Most drivers believe they're better than the average driver. Most employees believe they work harder than their coworkers. Many people believe they're less biased than the average person, which ironically proves the opposite. This illusion is comforting because it allows us to feel special, unique, and capable in a world where competition is fierce. But it also blinds us to our weaknesses, making us resistant to growth. The danger of illusory superiority is that it builds arrogance and denial. If you believe you are already exceptional, you stop improving. If you assume you're less biased than others, you stop questioning your judgments. If you think your skills are flawless, you fail to prepare, and reality eventually humbles you. The illusion may inflate confidence, but it leaves you unprepared for challenges. At the same time, this bias reveals a painful truth about human insecurity. Deep down, many of us fear being average, invisible, or replaceable. By convincing ourselves we're better, we soothe that fear. But real confidence doesn't come from illusions. It comes from honesty. True strength is admitting flaws, seeking growth, and facing reality without needing to distort it. Overcoming illusory superiority doesn't mean belittling yourself. It means embracing balance. You can value your strengths while staying aware of your blind spots. You can have pride without arrogance. The moment you stop needing to be above average is the moment you free yourself to become extraordinary through real growth. Illusory superiority is the mask of ego, but when you remove it, you gain something far greater: self-awareness, humility, and the chance to truly evolve. Hedonic Treadmill. The hedonic treadmill, also called hedonic adaptation, explains why no matter how much we achieve, buy, or gain, we eventually return to the same baseline of happiness. Imagine running on a treadmill. No matter how fast you run, you remain in the same place. That's how our pursuit of pleasure often works. You buy a new phone, and for a while, you're excited. Soon, it becomes just another object in your pocket. You land your dream job, and after the initial thrill, stress and routine set in. You chase recognition, luxury, or wealth, but the happiness fades, and you're left wanting the next thing. This treadmill is both fascinating and terrifying. It means that external rewards, no matter how grand, rarely give us lasting fulfillment. Our brains are wired to adapt. The excitement of newness fades, and what once thrilled us becomes the new normal. This is why even billionaires, surrounded by luxuries, often feel restless and dissatisfied. The treadmill keeps running, urging them, and us, to chase more, never stopping to rest in contentment. The hedonic treadmill is dangerous because it tricks us into endless pursuit. We tell ourselves, I'll be happy when I get this promotion, when I buy this car, when I find this partner. And for a moment, it feels true, but soon we're chasing again, never realizing happiness doesn't live at the end of the chase. It lives in how we approach life itself. Escaping the treadmill doesn't mean rejecting ambition or pleasure. It means shifting focus. Gratitude slows the treadmill by reminding us of what we already have. Presence pulls us out of the chase and into the now. Growth, contribution, and meaningful connection provide deeper fulfillment than temporary highs. The hedonic treadmill is a sobering reminder. If you let life be nothing more than a race for more, you'll always feel stuck. But if you learn to step off the treadmill, even briefly, you discover that true happiness was never waiting at the finish line. It was within you the whole time. Social comparison theory. Social comparison theory explains why so much of our identity and self-worth is built not in isolation, but in relation to others. Human beings naturally evaluate themselves by comparing their abilities, achievements, and circumstances with those around them. This behavior goes back to survival. In ancient times, knowing whether you were stronger, faster, or more skilled than others could mean the difference between life and death. But in the modern world, this instinct has morphed into a constant battle of self-measurement. Everywhere you look, comparisons are at play. Students compare grades, employees compare salaries, friends compare lifestyles. And in the age of social media, this tendency has been amplified to an extreme. With a single swipe, we can see curated highlights of other people's lives, vacations, relationships, careers, possessions, and suddenly our own lives feel smaller, duller, and less significant. Instead of appreciating what we have, we become trapped in a cycle of envy and insecurity. But comparisons are not always negative. They can motivate us to grow. Seeing someone achieve greatness can inspire us to aim higher, to push past our limits, and to believe that more is possible. The danger arises when comparisons turn toxic, when instead of being inspired, we become resentful. When instead of using others as a source of learning, we use them as proof that we are inadequate. The greatest mistake of social comparison is forgetting that everyone's journey is different. Comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20 will always leave you discouraged. Comparing your struggles to someone's highlights will always make you feel behind. The truth is, most of what you see in others is only a fraction of the full story. Behind every success is struggle. Behind every smile is pain. Behind every achievement is sacrificial. ICE. The way forward is not to eliminate comparisons, because they are part of being human, but to shift them inward. Instead of asking, am I better than them? Ask, am I better than I was yesterday? Instead of competing against strangers, compete against your past self. True growth comes not from measuring yourself against others, but from becoming the strongest, truest version of you. Reactance. Reactance is the invisible force that makes us rebel when we feel our freedom is being restricted. It's that sudden urge to do the very thing we're told not to do, simply because we don't like being controlled. This psychological reaction stems from our deep need for autonomy. We want to believe we are free to make our own choices, and when that freedom feels threatened, we often act out. Not because the forbidden choice is better, but because it represents our independence. You can see reactance everywhere. Tell a teenager they can't date someone, and suddenly the attraction intensifies. Place a do not touch sign on an object, and people's curiosity skyrockets. Ban a book or a movie, and it becomes more popular than ever. Even in politics, when leaders impose harsh restrictions, many people resist not because the rules are unreasonable, but because they hate the feeling of being forced. This instinct can protect us. It drives revolutions, challenges oppressive systems, and defends individuality, but it can also hurt us. Sometimes we reject good advice simply because it feels controlling. Sometimes we sabotage relationships, careers, or even our own well-being just to prove no one can dictate our choices. Reactance, if left unchecked, can trap us in a cycle of self-destructive rebellion, where we mistake resistance for freedom. The truth is, real freedom isn't about doing the opposite of what you're told. It's about making conscious choices for yourself. If your decisions are still being dictated, whether by others or by your own need to oppose them, then you're not truly free. You're still reacting, not choosing. Understanding reactance helps us recognize when our rebellion is genuine and when it's just an emotional defense. Sometimes the best way to prove your independence isn't to fight every rule, but to pause, think, and choose the path that truly serves your values. Reactance teaches us that freedom is not just the absence of control, it's the presence of self-awareness. Just world hypothesis. The just world hypothesis is a comforting lie the human mind tells itself. The belief that the world is fair, that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. On the surface, this belief provides comfort. It allows us to feel that justice exists, that good people will be rewarded and bad people will be punished. It gives order to chaos and meaning to suffering. But beneath that comfort lies a dangerous distortion. When we believe too strongly in a just world, we start blaming victims for their pain. If someone is poor, we assume they must be lazy. If someone suffers tragedy, we assume they must have done something to deserve it. If someone is treated unfairly, we tell ourselves they somehow brought it upon themselves. This protects our worldview by making suffering feel justified, because if suffering can happen for no reason, then it could also happen to us. And that thought is too frightening to bear. The just world hypothesis is visible in everyday life. When people hear of someone getting scammed, their first thought is often, they must have been careless. When they hear about an assault, they ask, what were they wearing? Why were they there? These questions are not about justice. They are about protecting the illusion of a fair world. By blaming the victim, people shield themselves from facing the terrifying truth that bad things can happen to anyone, at any time, without reason. The danger of this mindset is that it erodes compassion. Instead of offering empathy and support, we turn away from suffering, convinced it must be deserved. It blinds us to injustice and prevents us from challenging systems that perpetuate harm. It turns the world into a place where people cling to illusions rather than facing reality. But true strength lies in accepting the truth. The world is not always fair. Good people suffer, bad people thrive. Justice is not automatic. It must be fought for. When we let go of the just world hypothesis, we don't sink into despair. We rise into action. We stop blaming victims and start supporting them. We stop waiting for karma and start creating change ourselves. The just world hypothesis is comforting, but it is also a prison. Only by breaking it can we step into a world of true compassion, responsibility, and justice. Not imagined, but real. Information avoidance. Information avoidance is the strange and often destructive habit of deliberately ignoring information that could help us, simply because we don't want to face the truth. On the surface, this seems irrational. Why would anyone reject knowledge that could protect them, guide them, or prepare them? But when we look deeper, we see that it's not about logic. It's about emotion. Information can be painful. It can force us to confront realities we'd rather escape. It can strip away the comfort of denial and push us to make hard choices. And so we turn away, convincing ourselves that what we don't know won't hurt us. You see this in countless places. People avoid medical checkups because they're afraid of bad news, even though early detection could save their lives. Investors ignore financial red flags because they don't want to admit their money is at risk. Couples avoid difficult conversations because they fear what honesty might reveal about their relationship. In all of these cases, silence feels safer, but only temporarily. What we refuse to face grows stronger in the dark, and by the time we finally look, it often overwhelms us. The tragedy of information avoidance is that it gives us the illusion of control. By pretending the problem isn't there, we feel protected. But in reality, avoidance is surrender. It allows problems to spread unchecked, while we cling to the fragile comfort of ignorance. The truth doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. It waits, and it grows. The way forward is to reframe information, not as a threat, but as a tool. Knowledge is not the enemy. Fear is. Every piece of information, no matter how painful, gives us a chance to respond, to prepare, to adapt. Facing the truth may sting in the moment, but it saves us from greater suffering later. Information avoidance is the mind's attempt to escape pain, but it ends up creating far more pain in the long run. True strength lies in courage, the courage to look truth in the eye, even when it hurts, and use it to grow. Moral licensing. Moral licensing is the deceptive voice inside our heads that tells us we've earned the right to do something wrong just because we did something right earlier. It's the mental loophole that allows people to justify bad choices under the illusion of balance. Do a good deed, and suddenly you feel licensed to indulge in something you know you shouldn't. This bias reveals how our moral compass can be manipulated, not by others, but by ourselves. Picture someone who donates to charity in the morning, then feels justified spending recklessly in the afternoon, or someone who eats a healthy meal and then convinces themselves they deserve junk food later. Even in relationships, a person might convince themselves that because they've been loving and patient, they're now entitled to lash out in anger. Moral licensing doesn't just apply to small choices, it can shape entire lives. Leaders may excuse corruption because of past achievements. People may justify prejudice because they believe their earlier actions proved their goodness. The danger of moral licensing is that it creates a false sense of balance. We trick ourselves into thinking one positive act cancels out a negative one. But morality doesn't work like a bank account. A single act of kindness doesn't erase cruelty. One moment of honesty doesn't justify a lie. Yet, our minds crave equilibrium. And so, we build stories to protect our self-image, even when our behavior contradicts it. The key to breaking free is understanding that real integrity is not about individual acts, but about consistency. Doing the right thing once does not excuse doing the wrong thing later. True character is measured not by occasional peaks of virtue, but by steady alignment with values. The challenge is not to silence the voice of moral licensing, but to recognize it when it whispers, "You've earned this." That whisper is not a reward, it's a trap. And the moment you resist it, you step closer to living with authenticity and strength. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is one of the most powerful forces in psychology, and it shapes far more of our lives than we realize. At its core, it is the discomfort we feel when our actions, beliefs, or values don't align. The human mind craves consistency, and when it senses conflict, it rushes to resolve it, not by changing behavior, but often by twisting reality. This is why people lie to themselves, why they cling to justifications, and why they defend choices that secretly eat away at them. Imagine someone who smokes but believes in staying healthy. Instead of quitting, they convince themselves, it's just stress relief. Lots of people smoke and live long lives. Or someone who cheats in a relationship but insists, I'm still a good person. It didn't mean anything. These justifications don't erase the behavior. They just soften the inner conflict. Cognitive dissonance explains why people double down on bad decisions, why they defend harmful beliefs, and why they resist evidence that challenges their worldview. This psychological tug-of-war shows up everywhere. In politics, where people justify supporting corrupt leaders. In work, where employees convince themselves they're happy in jobs they secretly hate. In relationships, where partners excuse mistreatment because admitting the truth would shatter the image they've built. Cognitive dissonance doesn't only blind us to reality, it traps us in lies we tell ourselves to avoid the pain of change. But hidden within dissonance is a powerful opportunity. That discomfort we feel is not an enemy, it is a signal. It is the mind's way of telling us that something is out of alignment, that our actions are betraying our values. If we are brave enough to face it, dissonance becomes a compass pointing toward growth. It shows us where we need to change, what truths we are ignoring, and where we are living out of integrity. The question is whether we will silence that discomfort with excuses, or use it as fuel to become better. Cognitive dissonance reveals the cracks in our foundations. If we face them, we can rebuild stronger. If we deny them, the cracks widen until everything collapses. The choice is always ours: justify or transform. Observer Expectancy Effect. The Observer Expectancy Effect, sometimes called the Experimenter Effect, reveals the hidden influence that expectations have on outcomes. It shows that people don't simply observe reality, they shape it, often without realizing. When someone expects a certain result, their behavior, tone, and even body language can unconsciously push others toward fulfilling that expectation. In research, this is why double-blind experiments are necessary. If scientists know what they're hoping to prove, their subtle cues can influence the participants, contaminating the results. But this effect doesn't only live in laboratories. It shapes our everyday lives. Think about a teacher who believes a student is exceptionally bright. Without realizing it, they may smile more at that student, encourage them more, give them more chances to answer, and overlook mistakes more gently. Over time, that student begins to rise to the level of expectation. On the other hand, if a teacher assumes a student is lazy or incapable, their tone becomes sharper, their patience shorter, and their belief in that child fades. The student, feeling that judgment, may give up, not because of their actual ability, but because the observer's expectations slowly crush their confidence. Parents, friends, leaders, and even strangers carry this power. The way they look at us, the way they treat us, the assumptions they hold about us, all of it seeps into how we see ourselves. Expectations can become self-fulfilling prophecies, creating cycles of success or cycles of failure. The observer expectancy effect shows that belief is never neutral. Every expectation we hold toward another person carries weight, either lifting them or pressing them down. The lesson here is profound. Be mindful of the expectations you project. When you believe in others, even silently, you create space for them to arise. When you doubt them, you plant seeds of limitation. Reality is not just built by what people are, it is also shaped by how others expect them to be. Dunning-Kruger Effect. The Dunning-Kruger Effect is one of the most ironic quirks of the human mind. The less skilled or knowledgeable a person is, the more likely they are to overestimate their abilities. In contrast, those with true expertise often underestimate themselves, aware of just how vast the unknown really is. This creates a strange paradox. The loudest confidence often comes from the least qualified, while the most competent remain quietly unsure. You see this everywhere. A beginner in a field may feel like an expert after learning just the basics, convinced they understand it all. A person with little experience may speak with unshakable certainty, dismissing those who know more. Meanwhile, the true masters hesitate, aware of the complexity, the nuance, and the endless layers of depth in their craft. This is why ignorance and arrogance often travel together, while wisdom is usually accompanied by humility. The danger of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that it blinds people to growth. If you already believe you know everything, you stop learning. If you think your perspective is flawless, you resist correction. This overconfidence leads to mistakes, stubbornness, and sometimes even disaster. History is filled with examples of leaders, innovators, and ordinary people who failed not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked the humility to recognize their limits. But the effect also offers a hidden gift. It teaches us the importance of self-awareness. The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. The journey from ignorance to wisdom begins with that uncomfortable awareness of your own limitations. True strength doesn't come from pretending to know it all. It comes from admitting what you don't know and remaining curious. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not a flaw of a few. It is a universal human tendency. We are all vulnerable. To it. The question is whether we let it trap us in false confidence or whether we use it as a reminder to keep growing, keep questioning, and keep learning. The loudest voices are not always the wisest. Often wisdom whispers quietly, humbled by the vastness of truth. Foot in the door technique. The foot in the door technique is a powerful method of persuasion that shows how small commitments can lead to much larger ones. It begins with something simple, a tiny request so minor it feels harmless to agree to. But once you've said yes to that, you've set a psychological precedent. You want to stay consistent with your earlier decision. So when a bigger request comes, you're far more likely to accept it. Step by step, the door opens wider until you find yourself agreeing to something you never would have accepted at the start. Marketers use this constantly. A salesperson might ask you to try a free sample, then later invite you to buy. Activists may ask you to sign a small petition, then later request donations or deeper involvement. In personal life, someone might ask for a minor favor, borrowing a book, for instance, and later feel comfortable asking for something much larger. By beginning small, the technique disarms resistance, creating a slow path to agreement. The danger is that we often fail to see it happening. We like to believe our decisions are independent, but in truth, they are chained together by our desire to remain consistent. Once we commit, even slightly, we feel pressure to keep going, to avoid the discomfort of contradiction. This is why people stay in relationships, jobs, or obligations that grow far beyond what they initially signed up for, because one small yes gradually turned into many bigger ones. But the foot in the door technique isn't always negative. It can also be used for growth. Want to build a habit? Start small. Commit to one push-up a day, and soon you'll find yourself doing more. Want to improve your life? Take tiny steps toward change, and each step will naturally lead to the next. The same psychological force that manipulates us can also empower us. The key is awareness. Recognize when you, or small yes, is pulling you into a direction you don't truly want. Learn to pause and ask, do I actually want this bigger step, or am I just staying consistent with the first one? The foot in the door technique reveals how influence works, but it also teaches that every door you step through should be one you truly want to enter. Halo Effect. The halo effect is a psychological bias that makes us judge a person's entire character based on one positive trait. If someone is physically attractive, charming, or talented in one area, we unconsciously assume they must also be intelligent, kind, trustworthy, or good in other ways. It's as if one shining quality casts a halo of light that blinds us to flaws and exaggerates their strengths. You see this everywhere. Celebrities who excel in acting or sports are often treated as experts on politics, health, or philosophy, even though they may have no knowledge in those areas. Attractive people are assumed to be more capable at work, more trustworthy in relationships, and even more intelligent in studies, regardless of actual evidence. In courtrooms, juries are more likely to show leniency to good-looking defendants. In schools, teachers may grade attractive students more favorably. The halo effect is not about truth. It's about perception, and perception often overpowers reality. The danger is that this bias blinds us to balance. We elevate people too highly, putting them on pedestals, only to be shocked when they reveal their flaws. The halo effect doesn't just distort how we see others. It also creates pressure for those under its glow. Someone admired for one talent may feel crushed under expectations to excel everywhere, and when they inevitably fail, the disappointment feels sharper because the halo fades and reality rushes in. But this effect also teaches us a critical lesson. Humans are not one-dimensional. A person can be beautiful but selfish, intelligent but cruel, talented but dishonest. Just as one flaw should not define a person entirely, neither should one's strength. True wisdom means seeing beyond the halo, looking deeper, and recognizing that everyone is a mixture of light and shadow. By becoming aware of the halo effect, we protect ourselves from blind admiration and unfair judgment. It reminds us that respect should be earned in each area, not assumed wholesale. People are not angels because of one gift. They are human, complex, and imperfect, like all of us. Horn Effect. The Horn Effect is the dark twin of the halo effect, the bias that makes us judge a person's entire character based on one negative trait. Just as one positive quality can blind us to flaws, one perceived weakness can overshadow everything else. If someone makes a bad impression, we may assume they are incompetent, untrustworthy, or unlikable, even if that judgment is unfair. One horn casts a shadow over the rest of their being. Think about meeting someone who arrives late. Without knowing the reasons, we may instantly decide they are careless or unreliable, even if they are diligent in every other aspect of life. In workplaces, an employee who struggles in one area may be judged harshly overall, their strengths ignored. In relationships, one mistake can lead to someone being labeled as a failure, unworthy of trust or affection. The Horn Effect is dangerous because it reduces people to their flaws, stripping them of complexity. This bias often appears in social prejudice. People judge for their appearance, background, or a single mistake may find every other quality dismissed. It can crush confidence, sabotage opportunities, and perpetuate injustice. The Horn Effect is why first impressions are so powerful. Once the horns appear in our minds, it's difficult to see anything else. But just like the halo effect, Awareness can free us. No one should be defined by one failure or flaw. A bad habit doesn't erase kindness. A mistake doesn't erase potential. A weakness doesn't erase all strengths. The Horn effect reminds us that judgment is fragile, easily distorted, and often unfair. To live wisely, we must resist the urge to let one negative detail eclipse the full picture of a person. Everyone deserves the dignity of being seen fully, as a mix of strengths, flaws, growth, and humanity. When we break free from the Horn effect, we allow grace, forgiveness, and deeper understanding to guide how we see others. In-group bias. In-group bias is the natural human tendency to favor those we see as part of our group, while being suspicious, dismissive, or even hostile toward those we see as outsiders. It's an ancient instinct rooted in survival. In tribal times, trusting your own group was essential, while outsiders were often threats. But in the modern world, this instinct often creates division, prejudice, and conflict where unity could exist. You see in-group bias in sports, where fans passionately defend their team while ridiculing rivals. You see it in workplaces, where departments compete instead of collaborating. You see it in politics, where people fiercely support their own party while demonizing the opposition, regardless of actual ideas. On a larger scale, in-group bias fuels racism, nationalism, and classism, convincing people that those outside their group are less worthy of trust, empathy, or dignity. The danger of in-group bias is that it blinds us to truth and fairness. We excuse the flaws of our own group while magnifying the flaws of others. We justify harmful behavior when it comes from our side, but condemn it when it comes from opponents. This double standard creates cycles of conflict, where each group feels righteous while fueling division. But in-group bias also reveals something profound: our deep need to belong. People crave identity, community, and connection, and groups provide that. The challenge is not to eliminate groups, that's impossible, but to expand our definition of who belongs. Instead of shrinking into smaller circles of loyalty, we can widen our in-groups to include humanity as a whole. Awareness is the first step. When you notice yourself defending someone simply because they're one of us, pause. Ask if the defense is truly fair, or if bias is at play. The more we break free from in-group bias, the more we can build bridges instead of walls. True strength doesn't come from shrinking into tribalism. It comes from seeing beyond it and recognizing that the divisions between us and them are illusions we've created, not truths we must obey. Outgroup homogeneity. Outgroup homogeneity is the psychological tendency to see people outside of our own group as all the same, while viewing members of our own group as unique and diverse. It's a shortcut the brain takes, simplifying outsiders into stereotypes, while preserving individuality only for those we feel connected to. This bias is subtle but powerful, and it fuels prejudice, misunderstanding, and conflict across cultures, communities, and even friendships. Think about it. When you belong to a group, whether it's based on culture, religion, politics, or even hobbies, you know firsthand how different each member is. You see the nuances, the personalities, the contradictions. But when you look at another group from the outside, you're more likely to lump them together. They're all like that, we say, dismissing the rich diversity of individuals as one monolithic identity. This is why stereotypes spread so easily. They are products of the outgroup homogeneity bias. The danger is that this mindset strips others of their humanity. It turns people into caricatures, making it easier to distrust or even dehumanize them. In workplaces, it shows up as favoritism, where our team is seen as full of unique talent while the other department is labeled lazy or unhelpful. In politics, it manifests as seeing the opposing party as all the same, ignoring the real spectrum of beliefs within it. On a larger scale, it fuels racism, xenophobia, and conflict between nations. But outgroup homogeneity doesn't just distort how we see others, it limits us. When we reduce entire groups to single labels, we cut ourselves off from learning, connection, and empathy. The truth is, every group, including our own, contains both good and bad, strength and weakness, kindness and cruelty. Recognizing this breaks down walls of division and reminds us that individuality is universal. Escaping this bias requires humility and curiosity. It means challenging stereotypes, questioning assumptions, and remembering that one person cannot represent millions. The more we seek genuine connection with individuals, the harder it becomes to hold on to the illusion that they're all the same. Outgroup homogeneity may be an ancient instinct, but in today's interconnected world, breaking free from it is not just wise. It's necessary for peace, growth, and true understanding. Precrastination. Precrastination is the lesser-known twin of procrastination, but it's just as destructive. While procrastination is delaying tasks until the last moment, precrastination is the compulsion to complete tasks as quickly as possible, often at the expense of efficiency, accuracy, or long-term goals. It's the urge to get things out of the way, even when waiting or pacing ourselves would have been smarter. Imagine a student who rushes to finish an assignment days early, not because it's their best work, but because the thought of it sitting undone creates unbearable anxiety. Or think of someone who answers every email the second it arrives, just to clear the inbox, even if it interrupts deeper, more important work. Precrastinators live in constant urgency, confusing busyness with productivity. They feel relief in completing tasks quickly, but often pay the price in mistakes, stress, and missed opportunities for better outcomes. This mindset comes from a craving for control. By completing tasks early, precrastinators feel they've reduced uncertainty and regained peace. But ironically, this peace is short-lived. They trade quality for speed, clarity for relief, and thoughtful decision-making for rash action. In the long run, precrastination can be just as costly as procrastination, leading to burnout, regret, and a life spent reacting instead of strategizing. But precrastination also hides a deeper truth. It reveals our discomfort with mental clutter. Loose ends weigh on us, and some people cannot rest until every task is crossed off. The challenge is not to reject this drive entirely, but to balance it. Sometimes waiting is wiser. Sometimes slowing down produces excellence. Sometimes the best way to reduce stress is not to rush, but to accept that not everything needs to be done immediately. The lesson of precrastination is that productivity is not about souls, but about alignment. A rushed life is no better than a delayed one, if neither brings quality, peace, or meaning. True mastery is knowing when to act quickly and when to hold back, when to move with urgency and when to let patience sharpen the outcome. Abilene Paradox. The Abilene Paradox is one of the strangest and most frustrating traps of group decision-making. It describes the situation where a group of people collectively decide to do something that none of them individually want, simply because each person assumes everyone else supports it. In the end, they all suffer in silence, doing something none of them truly desired, just to avoid conflict, rejection, or rocking the boat. The name comes from a story. A family in Texas once decided to drive to Abilene, even though it was hot, dusty, and unpleasant. Each person thought the others wanted to go, so they agreed, only to discover afterward that nobody actually wanted the trip. They all acted against their own wishes, creating misery out of misplaced assumptions. This paradox happens all the time in workplaces, families, and friendships. A team might agree to a project everyone secretly doubts, simply because no one wants to be the one to speak up. A group of friends might choose an activity that none of them enjoy, just to avoid disagreement. Even in politics and society, entire communities may move in directions that few truly want, simply because individuals fear challenging the perceived consensus. The tragedy of the Abilene Paradox is that it silences truth. People sacrifice authenticity for harmony, but the result is neither peace nor happiness. It is collective frustration. Everyone feels trapped in decisions they never truly supported, and resentment builds quietly beneath the surface. The solution lies in courage and communication. Someone must be willing to ask, do we really want this, or are we just assuming? True leadership is not about enforcing agreement, but about creating space for honesty. When people feel safe to share doubts, the paradox dissolves. The Abilene Paradox is a reminder that silence is not the same as agreement, consensus built out. In fear of conflict is no consensus at all. The path to authentic unity is not pretending to agree, but daring to speak and daring to listen. Spotlight Effect. The spotlight effect is the tendency to believe that others are paying far more attention to us than they really are. It's the illusion that we're constantly under a spotlight, being judged, observed, and remembered by everyone around us. In reality, most people are far too focused on their own lives. their own insecurities, and their own struggles to notice our every move. Yet our minds convince us otherwise. Think of the last time you tripped in public, spilled a drink, or stumbled over your words in a conversation. Chances are, you replayed that moment in your head for hours, maybe even days, imagining how embarrassed you must have looked. But the truth is, most people forgot about it within seconds, because they were too busy worrying about themselves. The spotlight effect magnifies our flaws in our own eyes, but it rarely matches the way others actually see us. This effect can be crippling. It makes people afraid to speak up in meetings, fearing judgment. It discourages them from pursuing opportunities, convinced that failure would make them a laughingstock. It keeps people trapped in their own heads, rehearsing mistakes and overanalyzing interactions. In reality, life is not lived under a spotlight. It is lived in a world where everyone is too busy dealing with their own fears to focus much on ours. But the spotlight effect isn't just about embarrassment. It also affects how we see our successes. We assume people are constantly analyzing our choices, our outfits, our posts online. We assume the world is scrutinizing us with the same intensity that we scrutinize ourselves. Yet most people are scrolling, moving, and forgetting as quickly as they glance. The weight we carry is rarely the weight others place on us. It's the weight we put on ourselves. The lesson is liberating. People are not watching nearly as closely as you think. That means you are free. Free to try, free to fail, free to experiment, free to be imperfect. The spotlight effect shrinks your world, but once you see through it, you realize the stage was never as big as you imagined. Most people are in their own spotlight, not yours. And that realization can set you free. Planning fallacy. The planning fallacy is the stubborn optimism that makes us underestimate how long tasks will take, even when we've experienced the same mistake before. It's the voice that says, "This time will be different. This time I'll finish on schedule." Yet time and again, projects stretch longer, tasks take more effort, and deadlines slip away. Despite experience, the human brain remains biased toward best-case scenarios. Students think they'll finish assignments in a few hours, but end up pulling all-nighters. Workers assume projects will be done in weeks, only to see them drag into months. Even governments and corporations fall victim, underestimating budgets and timelines for massive projects, only to face spiraling costs. The planning fallacy blinds us with optimism, ignoring delays, distractions, and unexpected problems. Why does this happen? Because we imagine the future as if it will be smooth, forgetting that life never runs without obstacles. We remember the highlights of our efficiency, but forget the countless times we got derailed. And deeper still, we like to believe in the story of our own productivity, that this time we'll be focused, disciplined, unstoppable. The planning fallacy feeds our ego and fuels procrastination because we assume tasks will take less time than they truly do. The consequences are heavy, deadlines missed, stress piled high, goals abandoned because they took longer than expected. The planning fallacy robs us not only of time, but also of self-trust. Each failure deepens the feeling that we can't rely on ourselves, even though the real problem was not laziness, but miscalculation. The way to fight this is to confront reality, double your estimates, plan for setbacks, remember your past struggles, and use them as data, not as shame. The truth is, most things take longer than we expect, but that doesn't mean we've failed. Just means we're human. By planning with honesty instead of optimism, you build a system that works in the real world, not just in your imagination. The planning fallacy is a trap, but once you name it, you can step around it, and finally give yourself the time you actually need to succeed. Bystander Effect. The bystander effect is a chilling reminder of how easily human responsibility can dissolve in groups. It describes the phenomenon where people are less likely to help someone in need if others are present. The more people around, the less likely any individual is to step in. Each person assumes someone else will act, and in the end, no one does. Tragedies unfold not because of cruelty, but because of silence. The classic example is in emergencies. A person collapses in public, and dozens of onlookers freeze, waiting for someone else to call for help. In their minds, responsibility is diffused. Surely someone else will handle it, but the result is paralysis, and often the victim receives no aid until it's too late. This effect doesn't only apply to life or death situations. It shows up when someone is bullied and no one defends them, when injustice happens and crowds stay silent, when wrongdoing occurs and witnesses look away. The bystander effect is dangerous because it reveals how ordinary people can allow harm to continue. It strips away the illusion that morality is automatic. It shows that doing the right thing often requires deliberate courage, because the natural instinct in groups is to retreat into safety and invisibility. But the truth is, every act of courage starts with one person breaking the silence. When one bystander steps forward, others often follow. Courage is contagious, just as fear is. The antidote to the bystander effect is awareness, knowing that the instinct to freeze is natural, but not final. When you realize that everyone else is waiting, you can choose to be the one who moves. The lesson of the bystander effect is simple but profound. Never assume someone else will take responsibility. If you see injustice, step forward. If you see someone in need, act. If you witness wrong, speak up. One person's action can shatter the paralysis of the many. And in that moment, you discover that real change doesn't begin with crowds. It begins with one person brave enough to move. Pareidolia. Pareidolia is the fascinating psychological phenomenon where our brains see patterns, shapes, or faces in random things. It's why we see animals in clouds, a man on the moon, or a face staring back at us from an electrical outlet. This happens because the human brain is wired to recognize patterns, especially faces, with incredible sensitivity. From an evolutionary perspective, this made sense. Spotting a predator's face in the bushes or recognizing a friend in the distance could mean survival. But in the modern world, this instinct often misfires, leading us to see meaning where none exists. Pareidolia is more than a quirky trick of the mind. It reveals something profound about human perception. We don't just passively observe the world, we actively interpret it. Our brains are constantly filling in gaps, searching for order in chaos. That's why people see religious figures in toast, mythical creatures in shadows, or hidden messages in abstract art. The patterns aren't really there. They are projections of our minds, desperately trying to make sense of randomness. This phenomenon also explains why conspiracy theories spread so easily. Once the mind is primed to see a pattern, it begins connecting unrelated dots, weaving meaning into coincidence. Pareidolia isn't just about clouds and shadows. It's about the human hunger for stories, symbols, and significance. The lesson of pareidolia is twofold. First, it reminds us to appreciate the creativity of the mind. Our ability to see patterns is what gave us language, art, science, and innovation. But second, it reminds us to be cautious. Not every pattern is real. Not every sign has meaning. Sometimes, randomness is just randomness. Wisdom lies in knowing when to embrace imagination and when to anchor ourselves in reality. Clustering illusion. The clustering illusion is the human tendency to see patterns in random events, especially clusters that appear meaningful but are actually chance. Imagine flipping a coin and getting heads 5 times in a row. Logic tells us it's still random, but our instincts scream, something must be going on. This illusion convinces us that streaks, hot hands, or unlucky runs are signs of deeper meaning, when in truth, randomness often produces clusters that feel anything but random. You see this in gambling, where people believe a slot machine is due for a win after a long streak of losses. In sports, fans talk about hot streaks, as if players are magically blessed, even though the statistics often balance out over time. Even in everyday life, we notice coincidences, bumping into the same person multiple times or hearing the same song repeatedly, and assume there's a hidden pattern. The clustering illusion tricks us into seeing order where chance alone is at work. The danger of this illusion is that it drives poor decisions. Gamblers lose fortunes chasing patterns that don't exist. Investors waste money believing in streaks in the stock market. Ordinary people become superstitious, convinced that certain numbers, times, or events hold mystical meaning. The clustering illusion is comforting because it makes randomness feel predictable, but in reality, it blinds us to the truth of probability. Yet, this bias also reveals something fascinating. Humans are meaning-making creatures. Our survival once depended on spotting patterns, recognizing that dark clouds meant storms, or that rustling in the bushes might mean danger. The cost of false alarms was small compared to the risk of missing real threats. Today, that same instinct sometimes leads us astray, convincing us that randomness has intention. The lesson of the clustering illusion is humility, the will. A world is full of coincidence, and not every coincidence carries meaning. The challenge is to recognize when our minds are creating patterns that aren't really there, and to remember that randomness, by its very nature, often looks anything but random. Anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is the powerful psychological tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive when making decisions. This anchor becomes the reference point for everything that follows, even if it's irrelevant or misleading. Once our minds latch onto an anchor, it skews our judgment, shaping how we evaluate value, risk, or possibility. Consider shopping. If you see a shirt priced at $200, then see it marked down to $100, it feels like a bargain. Not because $100 is cheap, but because your mind anchored to $200. In negotiations, the first number mentioned sets the tone. If someone offers a high price up front, all future discussions revolve around that anchor, even if the number was arbitrary. Anchoring bias shows how the first impression of a number or fact can warp all future thinking. This bias doesn't only apply to money, it affects how we judge people, opportunities, and risks. If you hear someone described as brilliant before meeting them, you're more likely to interpret their actions positively. If you are told a task usually takes 2 hours, you'll judge your own performance against that anchor, regardless of reality. Anchors are everywhere, silently guiding our thoughts. The danger is that anchoring bias blinds us to independent judgment. Instead of analyzing situations with clarity, we become tethered to the first number, the first impression, the first story we heard. Marketers, salespeople, and manipulators know this well. They deliberately set anchors high or low to influence decisions. And, unless we're aware, we fall right into the trap. But anchoring can also be turned to our advantage. By setting our own anchors, high goals, strong standards, bold expectations, we can influence how others perceive value. Awareness is the key. The moment you pause and ask, am I deciding based on reality or based on the anch? Or I was given? You begin to reclaim control. Anchoring bias shows us how fragile human judgment can be, but with awareness, it can also become a tool for sharper, wiser decisions. Self-handicapping. Self-handicapping is the destructive habit of creating obstacles for yourself so that if you fail, you'll have an excuse. It's a defense mechanism designed to protect the ego. Instead of risking the pain of trying your best and still failing, you sabotage yourself in advance, procrastinating, avoiding preparation, or deliberately distracting yourself. This way, if you fail, you can say, I didn't really try. And if you succeed, it feels even more impressive because you overcame the handicap. Think about the student who waits until the last night to study for an exam. If they fail, they can say, well, I didn't even study, so it doesn't really count. Or the athlete who parties the night before a competition, failure becomes less painful if they can blame exhaustion instead of lack of talent. Self-handicapping isn't laziness, it's fear. It's the fear of discovering your limits, of facing the possibility that your best effort might not be good enough. So instead, you hold back, convincing yourself it's safer to never truly test your potential. The tragedy is that this behavior guarantees mediocrity. By protecting yourself from disappointment, you rob yourself of growth. You never get to see how far you could go because you're always tying weights to your own ankles. What feels like safety is actually a prison, a life where failure is softened but success is sabotaged. Breaking free requires courage, the courage to risk failure without excuses. It means saying, I will give my best, even if it reveals my limits. True strength doesn't come from never failing. It comes from failing without excuses and still trying again. Self-handicapping may protect your ego in the short term, but it destroys your potential in the long run. The day you stop sabotaging yourself is the day you begin to discover how powerful you really are. Status quo bias. Status quo bias is the powerful psychological pull to keep things the same, even when change would be better. It's the human tendency to prefer familiarity, routine, and stability, not because it's right, but because it feels safe. The mind whispers, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And so, people cling to jobs, relationships, habits, and systems that no longer serve them, simply because change feels uncomfortable. This bias appears in countless ways. Employees stay in companies they dislike because the idea of starting fresh feels overwhelming. People remain in unhealthy relationships because leaving feels scarier than staying. Even in society, outdated traditions and harmful systems persist because people resist the disruption of change. The status quo bias is not about logic, it's about fear. The unknown feels threatening, so the familiar, no matter how flawed, feels preferable. The danger of this mindset is that it breeds stagnation. Life becomes a loop of repetition, where growth is sacrificed for comfort. People convince themselves they're being practical when really they're being paralyzed by fear. The bias blinds us to the fact that the cost of staying the same is often greater than the cost of change. By clinging to the status quo, people let opportunities slip away, dreams wither, and potential go unexplored. But once you recognize this bias, you can challenge it. The truth is, the status quo is never neutral. It is a choice with consequences. Doing nothing is still doing something. Staying still is still moving, just in the direction of decline. The key is to ask, am I choosing this because it's right or because it's familiar? Growth begins the moment you stop confusing safety with stagnation. The status quo bias may comfort you, but it will never transform you. Only courage will. Ostrich Effect. The Ostrich Effect is the tendency to bury your head in the sand, like the mythical ostrich, and avoid unpleasant information, even when facing it would help. It's the refusal to check your bank account when you know you've overspent. It's ignoring health symptoms instead of going to the doctor. It's avoiding conversations about problems in your relationship because you fear the answers. The Ostrich Effect doesn't make problems disappear. It simply delays the pain, often making it worse in the long run. This effect is fueled by fear and denial. Confronting the truth feels threatening, so we convince ourselves that not knowing is safer. We cling to the illusion that ignorance equals peace. But this peace is fragile, constantly shadowed by anxiety. Deep down, we know the truth is waiting. The longer we avoid it, the more powerful it grows. A small financial issue becomes crushing debt. A minor health concern turns into a serious illness. A quiet conflict becomes a relationship-ending explosion. The danger of the Ostrich Effect is that it tricks us into thinking avoidance is protection when it's actually destruction. It erodes self-trust. It builds anxiety. It steals our ability to act before it's too late. The irony is that the fear of facing reality is always greater than the reality itself. Once the truth is exposed, we almost always find strength to deal with it. It's the anticipation, the silence, the hiding, the waiting that drains us. The cure is courage. Pull your head out of the sand and face what is in front of you. No, it won't always be easy. Some truths will sting, but every truth you face gives you power, the power to respond, to heal, to adapt. Avoidance robs you of that power. The Ostrich Effect is a prison of denial, but freedom comes the moment you look reality in the eye. And more often than not, you'll discover that you are far stronger than you feared. Rosy Retrospection. Rosy Retrospection is the bias that makes us remember the past as better than it actually was. Our minds polish old memories, softening the pain and amplifying the joy, until we look back with longing at times that may not have been so perfect. It's why people call their school days the best years of their lives, even though they complained about exams and stress at the time. It's why a past relationship seems sweeter in memory, even if it was full of arguments. Rosy Retrospection is the mind's way of editing reality, leaving out the darker details and painting nostalgia in warm colors. This bias can be comforting. It allows us to carry beautiful memories forward, to find meaning in struggles, and to look back with gratitude instead of regret. It explains why family vacations often feel more magical in memory than they did in the moment, when traffic jams, tired children, or bad weather cause stress. Over time, those negatives fade, while the highlights remain. The story we tell ourselves becomes far more pleasant than the actual lived experience. But rosy retrospection also carries danger. By idealizing the past, we risk undervaluing the present. We tell ourselves, those were the good old days, and forget that today, with all its imperfections, will one day become tomorrow's memory. People stuck in this mindset may refuse to embrace the opportunities in front of them because they are too busy longing for what is gone. They may miss chances for joy now because they have convinced themselves that happiness only existed then. The truth is, the past wasn't as perfect as we remember, and the present isn't as flawed as it feels. Rosy Retrospection teaches us that memory is not a photograph. It is a story we rewrite. The challenge is not to erase nostalgia, but to balance it with awareness. If we can appreciate the way the mind beautifies the past, we can remind ourselves to look more gently at the present. One day, today will be the good old days. The choice is whether we live it fully now or only appreciate it later through rose-colored memory. Escalation of commitment. Escalation of commitment is the destructive habit of throwing more time, money, or energy into a failing decision, simply because we've already invested so much. It's the cousin of the sunk cost fallacy, but with even more stubbornness. Once people commit to a path, they often double down when things go wrong, hoping to salvage their investment. Instead of cutting losses, they spiral deeper, wasting even more. This shows up everywhere. Businesses continue pouring millions into failing projects because they've already come too far. Governments refuse to withdraw from wars, even after years of failure, insisting that progress is just around the corner. On a personal level, people stay in toxic relationships, unhappy jobs, or broken dreams, convincing themselves that one more effort will make it worthwhile. Each new investment is justified by the old one, and the cycle of commitment grows stronger, even as the situation worsens. The root of escalation lies in pride and fear. People don't want to admit they were wrong. They fear the shame of wasted effort, so they keep pushing forward, convincing themselves that the next step will change everything. But often, all it changes is the depth of their regret. Escalation of commitment doesn't only waste resources, it destroys opportunities. Every moment spent on the wrong path is a moment stolen from the right one. The only way to break free is with brutal honesty. You must ask, if I weren't already invested, would I still choose this today? If the answer is no, then continuing is not commitment, it's entrapment. Real strength is not in clinging to a bad decision, but in having the courage to stop. Escalation of commitment feels like loyalty, but in truth, it's a trap. And the moment you cut the rope, you realize freedom was waiting all along. Gambler's fallacy. The gambler's fallacy is the false belief that past random events influence future outcomes. It's the illusion that if a coin has landed on heads 5 times in a row, then tails must be due. In reality, probability resets with each flip, but the human mind craves balance, so we imagine patterns where none exist. This fallacy is especially dangerous because it thrives in situations of chance, where people bet, risk, and lose based on illusions. Casinos are built on this fallacy. A gambler loses repeatedly and convinces themselves that their luck is about to turn. Another sees a roulette wheel land on red 10 times and bets everything on black, certain the streak cannot continue. But randomness has no memory. Each spin, each roll, each flip is independent. The universe doesn't keep score, yet our brains, wired to find patterns, insist that balance must come. The gambler's fallacy also appears outside of gambling. People think that after a streak of bad luck, good fortune must be around the corner. They assume that after repeated failures, success is guaranteed. But life, like a coin, doesn't work that way. Outcomes don't balance themselves out. Effort, choices, and circumstances do. This fallacy is dangerous because it breeds false hope and reckless risk-taking. People waste money, time, and energy chasing outcomes that have no basis in reality. The lesson here is simple but difficult. Randomness has no memory. The dice don't know they've rolled low 5 times. The coin doesn't know it landed heads before, and life doesn't owe you success after hardship. But understanding the gambler's fallacy is liberating. It reminds us that the future isn't dictated by luck balancing itself. It's shaped by our decisions. Instead of waiting for the odds to correct, we can focus on what we control: persistence, strategy, and action. The fallacy is a trap, but awareness is the key. Once you see it for what it is, you stop gambling with your future and start building it. Normative social influence. Normative social influence is the powerful force that makes people change their behavior, not because they truly believe in what they're doing, but because they want to be liked, accepted, or simply avoid rejection. It's the reason people laugh at jokes they don't find funny, go along with group opinions they secretly disagree with, or follow trends they don't actually enjoy. Deep down, it's not about truth or belief, it's about belonging. Humans are social creatures. From ancient tribes to modern cities, survival depended on acceptance. To be excluded meant danger. That ancient fear lingers in us today, shaping the way we act in groups. The pull of normative social influence is so strong that people will abandon their own judgment just to blend in. Studies have shown that even when participants clearly see the right answer, they'll give the wrong one if everyone else in the group does. The need for belonging often outweighs the need for truth. The danger is that this influence keeps people small. It silences their voices, pushes them into conformity, and robs them of authenticity. People who constantly bend to group approval may lose touch with who they are, always molding themselves into whatever the group demands. And in extreme cases, this pressure enables dangerous behavior. Entire societies have committed injustices simply because individuals feared standing out. But awareness of this influence gives you power. The moment you realize that your urge to conform is about acceptance, not truth, you can pause and ask, do I actually agree with this, or am I just trying to belong? True belonging doesn't come from hiding who you are. It comes from finding groups that accept you as you are. Normative social influence is strong, but stronger still is the courage to stand in your truth, even if it means standing alone. Informational social influence. Informational social influence is the tendency to conform because we believe others know more than we do. Unlike normative influence, which is about fitting in, this influence is about seeking guidance. When we're uncertain, we look around, assuming the majority must have the answer. This can be helpful in some cases, but it can also lead us badly astray. Imagine being in a crowded street and suddenly seeing everyone run in one direction. Instinctively, you would feel compelled to follow, assuming they know something you don't. Or think about being in a restaurant, unsure how to eat a dish, so you glance at others to copy their behavior. This influence helps us navigate uncertainty, but it also leaves us vulnerable to errors when the crowd is wrong. History is filled with examples of informational influence gone wrong. Financial bubbles grow when people invest simply because everyone else is investing. Rumors spread when people repeat them, assuming the majority must know the truth. Even dangerous behaviors gain traction when people trust the group's actions over their own judgment. The crowd isn't always wise. Sometimes it's blind. But informational influence also has value. It allows societies to share knowledge, traditions, and survival strategies. It helps us learn from others instead of starting from zero. The challenge is discernment, knowing when the crowd is offering wisdom and when it's spreading confusion. The key is to balance openness with critical thinking. Listen, observe, but always ask, is this actually right, or am I just assuming the group knows better? Informational social influence reveals the tension between trust and independence. Sometimes following the group can save your life. Other times, it can destroy it. The strength lies in knowing when to blend in and when to break away. Self-serving bias. The self-serving bias is the deeply human tendency to credit ourselves for successes while blaming outside forces for failures. When things go right, we proudly think, I earned this, I worked hard, I'm talented. But when things go wrong, we say it wasn't my fault, it was bad luck, unfair circumstances, or someone else's mistake. This bias protects our self-esteem, but it also blinds us from the truth. You can see this everywhere. A student who aces an exam says, I studied hard. If they fail, they blame the teacher for making it too difficult. An athlete who wins credits their dedication, but if they lose, they blame the referee or conditions. Even in relationships, people take credit for harmony, but shift blame for conflict. This bias isn't about truth. It's about self-protection. Our egos crave the comfort of victory without the sting of responsibility. The danger of the self-serving bias is that it stunts growth. If you never admit responsibility for failures, you never learn from them. If you always attribute success to your own brilliance, you become arrogant and blind to the role of luck, timing, or support from others. This bias creates a distorted view of reality, where the self is always the hero and never the culprit. But awareness turns the bias into a lesson. Instead of clinging to self-protection, you can embrace self-reflection. Ask yourself, am I giving myself too much credit? Am I shifting too much blame? Growth comes not from defending your ego, but from seeing your role honestly. True strength isn't in always being right. It's in being accountable when you're wrong. The self-serving bias may comfort the ego, but it weakens the soul. Humility and responsibility, though harder to carry, build a foundation far stronger than excuses ever could. Projection. Projection is the unconscious defense mechanism where people attribute their own thoughts, feelings, or flaws onto others. Instead of admitting something uncomfortable within themselves, they project it outward, accusing others of what they secretly feel or do. It's the mind's way of escaping self-confrontation by shifting the weight onto someone else. Picture a person who is dishonest but constantly suspects others of lying, or someone who struggles with anger but complains that everyone else is too hostile. Even in relationships, projection is common. Someone who feels insecure may accuse their partner of cheating, not because it's true, but because their own fears and desires are reflected outward. Projection is less about the person being accused and more about the one doing the accusing. It's a mirror, not a window. This behavior protects the ego in the short term, but it's destructive in the long run. By blaming others, people avoid looking inward. They never address their own flaws because it's easier to fight shadows than to face the truth. But this creates cycles of misunderstanding and conflict. Innocent people are accused, relationships are strained, and self-awareness is buried under layers of denial. Projection is a trap, but it's also a teacher. The accusations we make about others often reveal the battles we're fighting inside. If you constantly feel others are judging you, perhaps you are judging yourself. If you think everyone is selfish, perhaps you're ignoring your own self-centeredness. The world becomes a distorted mirror of your inner life. The way forward is courage. Projection dissolves the moment you own your truth. Instead of saying, "They're the problem," you ask, "What does this reveal about me?" Self-awareness is painful, but it's the only path to freedom. The more you accept your shadows, the less you need to project them onto others. And in that honesty, relationships grow, conflicts ease, and you begin to see the world not as a reflection of your fears, but as it truly is. De-individuation. De-individuation is the psychological state where people lose their sense of individual identity and responsibility when they blend into a group. In crowds, anonymity strips away self-awareness, and people do things they'd never consider alone. It's why peaceful protests sometimes erupt into riots, why online anonymity fuels cruelty, and why mobs commit acts that individuals later claim they don't remember choosing. When we feel anonymous, the normal checks of conscience weaken. The thought of, "What will people think of me?" fades, replaced by, "No one will notice me." The group becomes a shield, hiding personal accountability. In that shield, fear of judgment disappears, and impulses take over. Sometimes this leads to joy. People dance wildly at concerts or cheer loudly at games because the group's energy dissolves inhibition. But in darker moments, it unleashes violence, hate, and destruction. The danger of de-individuation is that it reveals how fragile morality can be when responsibility is shared. A single person may hesitate to act cruelly, but in a group, they may rationalize, "Everyone's doing it." Responsibility is diffused, and conscience is silenced. This is why history is filled with examples of atrocities committed not by a few monsters, but by ordinary people swept up in collective frenzy. But awareness of de-individuation also gives hope. If groups can magnify darkness, they can also magnify light. A crowd can spread cruelty, but it can also spread kindness, courage, and unity. The key is not to lose yourself in the anonymity of the group, but to hold on to your individual values. In moments of collective pressure, ask yourself, "Would I do this if I were alone?" That question anchors you to your integrity. De-individuation is a reminder that belonging is powerful, but dangerous when it erases responsibility. True strength is keeping your identity intact, even in the roar of the crowd. Groupthink. Groupthink is the dangerous phenomenon where the desire for harmony and agreement in a group becomes stronger than the pursuit of truth. Instead of questioning, debating, and considering alternatives, people silence their doubts to avoid conflict. On the surface, the group appears united, but beneath that unity lies conformity, suppression, and blindness. In boardrooms, groupthink leads teams to approve flawed projects because no one dares to challenge the leader. In politics, it silences dissenting voices, allowing harmful policies to pass unchecked. In friendships, it convinces people to go along with bad ideas just to keep the peace. Groupthink isn't about stupidity, it's about fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being the lone voice of opposition. The tragedy of groupthink is that it often leads to disaster. History is filled with examples: failed military operations, corporate collapses, and social injustices that could have been prevented if someone had spoken up. But in the pressure of the group, silence feels safer than truth. And so, mistakes grow unchecked, fueled by false consensus. The way to fight groupthink is to create space for dissent. True leaders don't demand agreement. They invite challenge. They reward honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. And on a personal level, the way to resist groupthink is courage. The courage to say, "I disagree." The courage to raise questions when everyone else nods. The courage to prioritize truth over comfort. Groupthink teaches us a vital lesson. Unity without honesty is not strength, it's weakness. Real strength comes from diversity of thought, from voices willing to clash, and from the wisdom to value truth over illusion. The group may silence the lone voice, but history often proves that the lone voice was right all along. Chameleon Effect. The chameleon effect is the unconscious tendency to mimic the behaviors, mannerisms, and even emotions of the people around us. Without realizing it, we mirror the gestures, speech patterns, and moods of others, blending into our social environment, much like a chameleon changes its color. This effect is rooted in our desire for connection. Humans instinctively copy those they interact with as a way of building rapport and belonging. Think about when you start speaking with the same slang as your friends, or when you adopt the body language of someone you admire. If the person you're talking to leans in, you might lean in too. If they cross their arms, you might follow. This happens subtly, almost invisibly, yet it can create powerful bonds. People tend to like those who unconsciously mirror them because it signals empathy and understanding. But the chameleon effect isn't just about gestures. It's emotional too. If you spend time with someone negative, you may find your mood darkening. If you're around someone enthusiastic, your energy may rise. This emotional mirroring can uplift or drain us, depending on who we surround ourselves with. The danger is that constant mirroring can blur the boundaries of identity. People who overuse this effect may lose their sense of self, constantly adapting to others instead of standing in their own truth. Over time, they risk becoming shapeshifters who reflect everyone else's light but forget their own. The lesson of the chameleon effect is balance. Mirroring can build connection, but authenticity sustains it. Use it to empathize and bond, but never at the cost of your own identity. Remember, blending in may make you liked, but standing firm in your true self is what makes you unforgettable. Fear of missing out, FOMO. FOMO is the nagging anxiety that you're being left behind, that others are experiencing opportunities, success, or joy while you're stuck where you are. It's the fear that life is happening without you, that doors are opening for others while closing for you. In today's hyper-connected world, where social media showcases curated highlights of everyone's lives, FOMO has become one of the most powerful psychological pressures. Scrolling online, you see friends traveling, buying homes, building careers, or enjoying relationships. Each image whispers, "You're behind, you're missing out." But what we forget is that these are snapshots, polished fragments, not the full story. Behind the smiles are struggles we don't see. Yet FOMO convinces us that others are living a better life, and we must catch up before it's too late. This fear can push people into restless living. They chase every opportunity, say yes to everything, and stretch themselves thin, terrified of being excluded. Or worse, FOMO drives them into despair, feeling inadequate and powerless in comparison to others. In both cases, the fear robs them of peace. But the truth is, no one experiences everything. Life is always a series of trade-offs. For every door you walk through, there are doors you leave closed. That's not failure, that's reality. The secret is not to eliminate FOMO, but to replace it with JOMO, the joy of missing out. Instead of obsessing over what others are doing, you embrace the richness of your own path. FOMO reminds us of a simple truth. You can't live every life, but you can fully live yours. The moment you stop measuring your journey against someone else's highlight reel, you discover that you were never missing out. You were simply being called to your own unique story. Reciprocity Principle. The Reciprocity Principle is the powerful psychological rule that when someone gives to us, we feel obligated to give back. This instinct is woven deep into human culture because cooperation and mutual exchange were essential for survival. From ancient gift-giving rituals to modern marketing strategies, reciprocity governs human behavior in ways both subtle and profound. Imagine someone does you a small favor. Almost instantly, you feel a pull to repay them, even if they never ask. This principle is so ingrained that even unwanted gestures can trigger it. Marketers use it all the time: free samples in a store, small gifts, or exclusive discounts, all designed to awaken the feeling of debt, nudging you to return the favor with a purchase. But reciprocity isn't just a sales trick. It's also the glue of relationships. Friendships and partnerships thrive on give and take. When someone gives generously, the natural response is to reciprocate, building trust and mutual respect. Without reciprocity, relationships feel unbalanced, with one person always giving and the other always taking. The danger is that reciprocity can be exploited. Manipulators offer false kindness, knowing it creates pressure to return the favor. People may end up saying yes to things they don't want, simply because they feel indebted. In its darker form, reciprocity becomes a weapon, trapping people in cycles of obligation. Yet, used wisely, the reciprocity principle is one of humanity's greatest strengths. It teaches that generosity has ripple effects. A single act of kindness sparks another, creating chains of goodwill. The key is awareness, knowing when reciprocity is authentic and when it's being forced. When guided by sincerity, reciprocity doesn't bind us in obligation. It lifts us into a cycle of trust, gratitude, and shared humanity. Mauss' Locus of Control. Locus of Control is the belief system that determines how much control you think you have over the events in your life. People with an internal locus of control believe their choices, actions, and discipline shape their outcomes. If they succeed, it's because they worked hard. If they fail, they believe they can improve and try again. On the other hand, people with an external locus of control believe life is mostly shaped by luck, fate, or forces outside their influence. Success feels like coincidence, and failure feels inevitable. This mindset quietly governs everything. Two people can face the same setback, losing a job, for example, but respond completely differently, depending on their locus of control. One says, "I'll sharpen my skills, network, and find a better opportunity." The other says, "The system is rigged, there's nothing I can do." The difference isn't circumstance, it's perspective. An internal locus of control builds resilience, motivation, and responsibility. You see yourself as an active agent in your life, but when taken too far, it can also create guilt, blaming yourself for everything, even things beyond your control. An external locus of control, on the other hand, can protect from stress by allowing acceptance of things you can't change. But when overused, it breeds helplessness, passivity, and despair. The truth lies in balance. There are things you can control: your actions, your discipline, your mindset, and there are things you cannot: luck, timing, the actions of others. Wisdom is knowing the difference. The locus of control is not fixed. It shifts with awareness. The more you train yourself to focus on what you can influence, the more empowered you become. Because while fate plays its part, the direction of your life is still largely determined by the hands on the wheel, and those hands are yours. Negativity bias. Negativity bias is the brain's tendency to focus more on negative experiences than positive ones. One insult outweighs 10 compliments. One failure overshadows a dozen successes. One bad memory lingers longer than countless good ones. This bias exists because our ancestors' survival depended on noticing threats. Missing a danger could cost their life, while missing a pleasure rarely did. The brain evolved to give negatives more weight, a survival strategy that now often becomes a psychological burden. Think about how you remember criticism more vividly than praise, or how a single bad day at work can ruin your week, even if the other days went smoothly. News outlets thrive on this bias, knowing people pay more attention to danger, conflict, and tragedy than to peaceful or positive stories. Social media amplifies it too, keeping people hooked on outrage, fear, and drama. The danger of negativity bias is that it distorts reality. Life may be balanced or even good, but the mind exaggerates the bad, convincing you that things are worse than they are. It fuels anxiety, depression, and hopelessness because it makes the darkness feel bigger than the light. Relationships suffer as well, since people cling to small mistakes while overlooking countless acts of love and care. But awareness is power. By knowing your mind magnifies negativity, you can consciously balance the scale. Gratitude practices, journaling, or simply pausing to acknowledge small wins are antidotes to the bias. The goal isn't to ignore negativity, it's to put it in perspective. Life will always have shadows, but the negativity bias doesn't have to blind you to the light. The more you train your mind to notice the good, the more accurately you'll see reality. And reality, when balanced, is far more hopeful than fear makes it seem. Framing effect. The framing effect is the psychological phenomenon where the way information is presented, or framed, changes how we perceive and decide, even if the underlying facts remain the same. People don't respond to reality itself, they respond to how reality is described. For example, imagine a medical treatment described as having a 90% survival rate. Most people feel optimistic, but if the same treatment is described as having a 10% mortality rate, fear rises, even though the numbers are identical. Politicians, advertisers, and media outlets use this effect constantly, shaping public opinion not by changing facts, but by reframing them. This effect is powerful because it bypasses logic and taps into emotion. We're more likely to take risks if something is framed as avoiding a loss than if it's framed as achieving a gain. That's why salespeople say, "Don't miss out," instead of "Here's what you could gain." The brain is wired to react more strongly to loss, so framing can push us toward choices that feel emotional rather than rational. The danger is that the framing effect makes us vulnerable to manipulation. We can be nudged into decisions that don't align with our true values, simply because the information was packaged in a certain way. Two people can be told the same fact in different words and walk away with completely different beliefs. But the framing effect can also be used for good. Reframing your own thoughts changes your experience of reality. Instead of saying, "I failed," you can frame it as, "I learned." Instead of, "I lost time," you can say, "I invested in growth." The facts remain the same, but the story changes. And with it, your energy, your courage, and your motivation. The framing effect teaches us that perspective shapes reality. If words can change how we feel about facts, then we must be vigilant about the frames we accept and intentional about the frames we choose. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the deep psychological tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information in ways that confirm what we already believe. Instead of searching for truth, our brains search for validation. We cling to evidence that supports our opinions while ignoring or dismissing anything that challenges them. In other words, we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we already think it is. Imagine someone who believes a certain diet is the healthiest. They'll focus on articles and studies that praise it, while dismissing evidence of its flaws. Or consider politics. People consume media that aligns with their beliefs, while rejecting opposing perspectives as fake or biased. On social media, algorithms amplify this by feeding us content we agree with, trapping us in echo chambers where our beliefs are constantly reinforced. The danger of confirmation bias is that it narrows our minds. It locks us into our own perspective, making us blind to alternative viewpoints. It creates division, because everyone can point to their evidence, convince they're right, while refusing to acknowledge the validity of the other side. At its worst, it fuels prejudice, misinformation, and extremism. But confirmation bias isn't always malicious. It's human. The brain seeks comfort in consistency. Doubt feels threatening, so we prefer certainty, even if it's false. Recognizing this tendency is the first step toward overcoming it. The real growth begins when you deliberately seek out information that challenges you. When you ask yourself, "What if I'm wrong?" and actually explore the possibility. The cure for confirmation bias isn't abandoning your beliefs. It's strengthening them by testing them against reality. True wisdom comes not from surrounding yourself with agreement, but from engaging with perspectives that stretch and sharpen your understanding. When you escape confirmation bias, you don't just become smarter, you become freer. Availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is the mental shortcut where we judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. If something is vivid, recent, or emotionally charged, we assume it's more common than it actually is. The brain equates memorability with probability. Think about hearing news of a plane crash. Even though flying is statistically one of the safest modes of travel, the vividness of the story makes people afraid to board planes. Or consider crime reporting. People who constantly see violent crimes on the news often believe their neighborhoods are unsafe, even when crime rates are falling. The availability heuristic distorts reality by amplifying what is most memorable, not what is most accurate. Marketers and politicians exploit this bias relentlessly. A single dramatic story can outweigh mountains of data in shaping public opinion. People fear shark attacks more than heart disease, even though the latter is far more likely, because shark attacks are more dramatic and memorable. This heuristic reveals how fragile rationality can be when emotion and memory take the lead. The danger is that the availability heuristic fuels fear, anxiety, and poor decisions. People buy unnecessary insurance, avoid safe activities, or make irrational choices because they confuse rare events with common ones. It warps perspective, making the extraordinary feel ordinary and the ordinary feel invisible. But awareness changes everything. When you pause and ask, am I judging this based on evidence or on what's easiest to recall? You regain clarity. Reality often looks very different from the stories that dominate your memory. By questioning the vivid, you make space for the true. The availability heuristic teaches us that what's most memorable isn't always what's most important, and wisdom lies in knowing the difference. Overjustification Effect. The overjustification effect happens when external rewards, like money, praise, or prizes, reduce our intrinsic motivation for an activity we once enjoyed. When we start doing something purely for the reward, the natural joy of the activity fades. What was once play turns into work, and passion gets replaced by obligation. Consider a child who loves drawing. If you start paying them every time they draw, their focus shifts from the joy of creating to the expectation of payment. Over time, they may stop drawing unless they're rewarded. Or, think of athletes who begin with a love of the game, but lose that spark when pressured by contracts, sponsorships, or endless competition. The external rewards overshadow the internal drive. This effect reveals something profound about human nature. True fulfillment comes from doing things because they matter to us, not because they earn us something. External rewards can motivate in the short term, but they often erode the deeper sense of meaning. The moment joy becomes a transaction, it starts to fade. The danger of the overjustification effect is that it can turn life into a series of obligations. We stop reading for love and only read for grades. We stop working out for health and only do it for appearance. We stop helping others for compassion and only help when recognition is guaranteed. Slowly, passion dies under the weight of pressure. The antidote is to reconnect with intrinsic motivation. Ask yourself, would I still do this if no one paid me, praised me, or noticed? That question brings you back to the core of passion. Rewards have their place, but they should never be the main reason you act. True purpose isn't bought, it's lived. And when you protect your intrinsic drive, no external reward can take away the joy of doing what you love. Authority bias. Authority bias is the tendency to place undue trust in the opinions, decisions, or commands of authority figures, often overriding our own judgment. When someone appears to have power, status, or expertise, we instinctively give their words more weight, even when they're wrong. This bias is rooted in our social wiring. Throughout history, following leaders often meant survival. But in the modern world, this instinct can easily be manipulated. Think of the classic experiment by Stanley Milgram, where ordinary people delivered what they thought were painful electric shocks to others simply because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to. Despite their discomfort, most participants obeyed, proving how deeply authority can override morality. We see this everywhere. Doctors, bosses, celebrities, or influencers can convince people to act against their own interests simply because they're perceived as credible or powerful. Authority bias can be helpful when the figure is truly knowledgeable. Trusting a skilled surgeon or an experienced pilot is often wise. But the danger comes when authority is mistaken for truth. People stop questioning, stop thinking critically, and blindly follow. In workplaces, this creates cultures where bad ideas go unchallenged. In politics, it enables corruption and tyranny. In personal life, it can make people hand over decisions to others instead of trusting their own voice. The antidote to authority bias is awareness and courage. Respect authority, but never surrender your responsibility to think for yourself. Ask, is this right? Is this true? Does this align with my values? Authority can guide, but it should never replace your conscience. True wisdom is knowing when to listen to leaders and when to stand up, even if it means standing against them. Optimism bias. Optimism bias is the tendency to believe that positive outcomes are more likely for us than negative ones, even when logic says otherwise. It's the voice that says, accidents happen, but not to me. Illness strikes others, but I'll be fine. Failure is possible, but I'll beat the odds. This bias paints the future with bright colors, often underestimating risks and challenges. On the surface, optimism bias can be a gift. It gives people hope, resilience, and the courage to pursue dreams that look impossible. Without it, humanity might never take risks, start businesses, or fall in love. Optimism fuels progress because it convinces us that the leap is worth it. But optimism bias can also blind us. It makes people ignore warning signs, neglect preparation, and underestimate danger. Smokers often believe they won't get cancer. Drivers think accidents won't happen to them. Investors pour money into risky ventures, convinced they'll be the exception. Optimism bias comforts in the short term, but can devastate in the long run when reality strikes harder than expected. The secret is balance. Optimism is not the enemy. Blind optimism is. Hope should inspire action, not replace it. The healthiest mindset is realistic optimism, believing in the possibility of good outcomes while also acknowledging risks and preparing for them. Optimism bias teaches us that faith in the future is powerful, but wisdom requires combining that faith with foresight. Pygmalion Effect. The Pygmalion Effect is the remarkable psychological phenomenon where higher expectations lead to improved performance. When someone believes in you, their belief itself can lift you higher, shaping your actions and outcomes. It's proof that faith and perception are not passive. They are powerful forces that mold reality. In classrooms, teachers who expect excellence from their students often see those students rise to meet those expectations. In workplaces, leaders who express belief in their teams inspire greater effort and achievement. Even in relationships, when someone sees the best in us, we often strive to become that version of ourselves. The Pygmalion Effect shows that belief is not just a reflection of reality. It can create it. But this effect is a double-edged sword. Just as positive expectations lift people up, low expectations drag them down. If someone is treated as incapable, unworthy, or destined to fail, they may unconsciously conform to that image. This is why encouragement, support, and belief are not trivial. They are life-changing forces. The lesson is clear. The expectations we hold for others, and for ourselves, matter. When you expect greatness, you plant the seed of it. When you treat others as capable, they often rise to the challenge. And when you expect little, they may shrink to fit that box. The Pygmalion Effect teaches us to be careful with our beliefs because they can become self-fulfilling. Believe in others, and you give them wings. Believe in yourself, and you discover you've had wings all along. Golem Effect. The Golem Effect is the darker twin of the Pygmalion Effect. Where high expectations can lift someone higher, the Golem Effect shows that low expectations can drag them down. When others believe you're incapable, lazy, or destined to fail, that belief often seeps into your self-image. You begin to act in ways that confirm their doubts, not because you lack ability, but because constant negativity has convinced you you're powerless. This phenomenon appears in classrooms, where students labeled as weak often perform worse, not because they're less intelligent, but because teachers treat them with lower patience and less encouragement. It happens in workplaces too, where employees deemed unreliable stop trying because no one expects them to succeed anyway. The Golem Effect is subtle but poisonous, a self-fulfilling prophecy that traps people in mediocrity. The tragedy is that most people underestimate how much expectations shape behavior. A person doesn't just respond to their inner drive. They respond to how others see them. Constantly being treated as a failure chips away at motivation until the person stops believing in themselves altogether. But the Golem Effect can be broken. Awareness is the first step. Realizing that someone else's low expectations do not define your worth. Just because others doubt you doesn't mean you have to doubt yourself. The strongest rebellion against the Golem Effect is to prove it wrong, to rise above the weight of others' disbelief, And equally, as leaders, teachers, or friends, we must remember, the way we see others shapes who they become. Expect little and you shrink people. Expect more and you give them room to grow. Placebo Effect. The placebo effect is one of the most fascinating demonstrations of the mind's power over the body. It occurs when a person experiences real improvement in symptoms after receiving a treatment that has no active ingredients, like a sugar pill or saline injection, simply because they believe it will help. The expectation of healing triggers genuine biological changes, pain lessens, anxiety eases, even measurable health improvements occur. This effect proves that belief itself can be medicine. The mind doesn't just interpret reality, it helps create it. If you believe you're getting better, your brain releases chemicals that mimic the effects of actual drugs. Endorphins, dopamine, and other neurotransmitters shift, altering your physical state. In some cases, the placebo effect has been nearly as powerful as real medication. But this phenomenon also reveals a paradox. If belief can heal, it can also deceive. Placebos don't cure the root cause. They trick the mind into feeling better. That means over-relying on them can create false hope. Still, the placebo effect is a reminder that mindset and expectation play a crucial role in recovery. Medicine is not only about chemicals, it's also about belief, trust, and the stories we tell ourselves. The takeaway is profound. Your brain is not just a passenger in your health journey, it's a driver. Belief doesn't replace action, but it amplifies it. The placebo effect shows us that healing is not only physical, but also psychological. And when body and mind work together, the results can feel nothing short of miraculous. Nocebo Effect. If the placebo effect is the mind's power to heal, the nocebo effect is the mind's power to harm. It happens when negative expectations create real negative outcomes. If you believe a harmless pill will cause side effects, you might start experiencing nausea, headaches, or fatigue. If you are convinced a diagnosis is fatal, your body may deteriorate faster under the weight of fear. The nocebo effect reveals the shadow side of belief. The brain can make you sick simply because you expect it. Doctors often see this when patients read long lists of side effects for medication. The more they expect harm, the more likely they are to feel it, even if they're taking a placebo. In everyday life, this effect explains why constant worry or stress weakens the immune system, creating physical symptoms of illness. The body follows the script the mind writes. The danger of the nocebo effect is that it feeds on fear. When you expect pain, you feel it more intensely. When you expect failure, your body reacts with anxiety that sabotages your performance. It's not just in your head. It's real because your brain and body are inseparably linked. The lesson is clear. The stories we tell ourselves can either heal us or harm us. Awareness of the nocebo effect reminds us to be careful with our expectations and the words we internalize. Fear and negativity are powerful medicines, but poisonous ones. By shifting focus toward hope, strength, and possibility, we harness the mind's power not to destroy us, but to help us endure. Zeigarnik Effect. The Zeigarnik Effect is the psychological phenomenon where unfinished tasks linger in our minds far more than completed ones. Your brain hates loose ends. If you leave something incomplete, your mind keeps circling back, reminding you again and again until it's finished. This is why you can't stop thinking about the email you haven't replied to, the project you left half done, or the conversation you didn't finish. Psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik discovered this effect when she noticed that waiters could remember complicated orders perfectly, but only until the food was served. Once the task was complete, the memory vanished. Our brains keep unfinished business alive because they crave closure. The Zeigarnik Effect can be a blessing. It motivates us to finish tasks, to seek resolution, to tie up loose ends. It fuels productivity and keeps us from abandoning goals too easily. But it can also be a curse. It causes mental clutter, filling our minds with anxiety over incomplete projects, making rest feel impossible. Too many open loops create stress, overwhelm, and insomnia. The key is learning to manage it. Writing down tasks helps ease the mental burden because the brain feels reassured that the loop is stored somewhere. Breaking big goals into small steps gives the satisfaction of progress, tricking the mind into releasing some of the tension. The Zeigarnik Effect teaches us that closure matters, not just for tasks, but for emotions, relationships, and memories. Unfinished stories haunt us until we give them an ending. Serial position effect. The serial position effect is the psychological tendency to remember the first and last items in a sequence better than the middle ones. When given a list, people recall the beginning, the primacy effect, and the end, the recency effect, most vividly, while the middle often fades. This principle shapes not only memory, but persuasion, marketing, and even how we experience life events. Think of a speech. People remember the opening words and the closing message, but the middle often blurs. Advertisers know this too. They place key messages at the start and end of the commercials. Even in relationships, first impressions and final goodbyes carry disproportionate weight compared to the everyday moments in between. This effect can be used to your advantage. When learning, reviewing material at the start and end of study sessions boosts retention. When presenting, saving your strongest points for the opening and closing ensures they stick. The serial position effect reminds us that beginnings and endings matter. They shape the entire story. But it also has a deeper lesson. Life itself is remembered this way. People recall the first experiences, first love, first job, first home, and they recall endings, the closing chapters, the goodbyes, the final moments. The middle years, the routine, the ordinary days often slip through memory's cracks. This isn't because they lack importance, but because our brains are wired for highlights. The challenge is to honor the middle, the quiet days, the ordinary rhythms, because though they may fade in memory, they are where most of life is lived. The serial position effect reminds us that the start and finish may define the story, but the middle is what gives it depth. Impostor syndrome. Impostor syndrome is the crippling belief that your achievements aren't real, that your success is luck, and that sooner or later people will discover you're a fraud. Even high achievers, leaders, and experts struggle with it. They downplay their accomplishments, attribute them to chance, and live with constant fear of being exposed. This syndrome doesn't discriminate. Students with top grades feel unworthy of their success. Professionals in high positions doubt their competence. Artists, writers, and creators feel their work isn't good enough, even when praised. The louder the applause, the more they worry it's undeserved. Impostor syndrome turns success into a burden, making people anxious instead of proud. The roots of this syndrome lie in perfectionism, comparison, and internalized doubt. People with impostor syndrome hold themselves to impossible standards, so even real success feels insufficient. They compare their behind-the-scenes struggles to others' polished exteriors, forgetting that everyone battles insecurities. The danger is that impostor syndrome robs people of joy. Instead of celebrating victories, they dismiss them. Instead of stepping forward with confidence, they shrink back, convinced they don't belong. Over time, this mindset sabotages growth because opportunities are missed when self-doubt whispers too loudly. But here's the truth. Competence isn't the absence of doubt. It's the courage to keep going despite it. Even the most accomplished people have moments of insecurity. The difference is that they don't let those doubts stop them. Imposter syndrome may never fully disappear, but it can be transformed. By acknowledging it, by speaking it aloud, by realizing how common it is, you weaken its power. The greatest irony of imposter syndrome is this. The very fact that you feel it often means you care deeply about doing well. Frauds rarely doubt themselves. Only the genuine, striving souls do. And that means, if you've ever felt like an imposter, chances are you're far more real, capable, and deserving than you realize. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one of the most famous models in psychology, illustrating the layered structure of human motivation. It suggests that people are driven by a pyramid of needs, starting from the most basic survival requirements at the bottom and moving upward toward higher aspirations. The foundation is physiological needs: food, water, shelter, sleep. Without these, nothing else matters. Once those are secured, the next level is safety, protection, stability, freedom from fear. Only when survival and security are stable do people begin craving deeper connections. The third level is love and belonging, friendships, family, intimacy, community. Humans are social beings. Isolation wounds us as deeply as hunger. Above this lies esteem, the need for respect, recognition, and accomplishment. Success without acknowledgement feels hollow, while acknowledgement without real growth feels shallow. At the top of the pyramid sits self-actualization, the drive to fulfill one's potential, to create, to contribute, to become fully oneself. What makes this hierarchy profound is not just the order, but how often people get stuck. Many chase esteem, money, fame, titles, without building belonging or safety, leaving them empty despite outward success. Others seek love without addressing their basic needs, creating fragile foundations. And some reach self-actualization only by embracing the struggles of every level below it. Maslow's model reminds us that growth is layered. You cannot leap to the top without addressing the bottom. But it also reminds us that the highest human need isn't survival alone, it's meaning. Once you're fed, safe, and loved, the question becomes, what will you do with your life? What will you create, give, or become? The pyramid is not just about needs. It's about the journey from survival to significance. Liking bias? Liking bias is the psychological tendency to be more easily influenced by people we like. When someone is attractive, charming, or relatable, we give their words more weight, even when their arguments are weak. This bias explains why salespeople focus on friendliness, why leaders cultivate charisma, and why popularity often overshadows competence. Think about how often we agree with someone simply because they smile warmly or remind us of ourselves. We trust recommendations more when they come from friends rather than strangers, even if both have the same knowledge. We buy products endorsed by celebrities we admire, even when they have no expertise. Liking bias blurs logic with emotion, convincing us that likable equals trustworthy. But this bias can be dangerous. Manipulators use charm to disarm. Scammers build rapport before deception. Even in workplaces, decisions about hiring or promotion may be swayed more by personal likability than true skill. When liking overrides critical thinking, people end up following personalities rather than principles. Yet, liking bias also reveals a hopeful truth. Kindness, empathy, and warmth matter. They open doors that cold logic cannot. People are not persuaded by facts alone. They are persuaded by the humans delivering them. The key is balance. To remain aware that likability should never substitute for truth, while also recognizing that likability can enhance the power of truth when it's genuine. The lesson is simple but powerful. Be likable, but also be real. And when judging others, don't confuse charm with character. A friendly smile may open your heart, but wisdom asks, does this person's actions match their words? Scarcity Principle. The scarcity principle is the psychological effect where things become more desirable when they are limited or rare. When opportunities feel scarce, people chase them harder, convinced that scarcity equals value. This is why limited edition products sell fast, why countdown timers increase sales, and why people often want what they can't have. Scarcity triggers urgency, making us feel that if we don't act now, we'll lose out forever. At its core, scarcity is tied to survival. In our evolutionary past, resources were limited. Food, water, shelter, anything rare was precious. That instinct still drives us today, even in a world of abundance. A nearly sold-out concert feels more exciting. A book labeled banned suddenly becomes irresistible. A person who seems hard to get appears more attractive than one who's readily available. Scarcity inflames desire, but the scarcity principle is a double-edged sword. Marketers exploit it constantly, creating false scarcity, only two left in stock, even when supply is plenty. People fall into traps, buying things they don't need out of fear they'll miss out. Scarcity also breeds unhealthy competition, making people fight for limited opportunities instead of creating new ones. Yet scarcity can be a motivator too. Knowing that time is limited pushes us to live more fully. Recognizing the rarity of opportunities can inspire action we might otherwise delay. The lesson is not to reject scarcity, but to see it clearly. Ask yourself, do I want this because it's valuable or just because it's scarce? Scarcity can magnify worth, but only when the thing itself is truly worthy. Peak End Rule. The peak end rule is the psychological principle that people judge an experience not by its entire duration, but by its most intense moment, the peak, and its final moment, the end. The highs and the closing chapter weigh heavier in memory than everything in between. This explains why a vacation filled with small annoyances can still be remembered fondly if it ends with a magical sunset, or why a painful medical procedure is recalled less negatively if the pain eased toward the end. Our minds don't store life as a continuous film. They keep snapshots, the sharpest emotions, and the way it all wrapped up. This is why concerts save the biggest performance for the finale, why films are judged by their endings, and why relationships are often remembered, not for every day, but for how they ended. The middle gets blurred, but the peak and the end burn into memory. This rule carries lessons both hopeful and dangerous. On one hand, it shows the power of creating meaningful highlights, moments so powerful they define the whole. It also shows the importance of endings. A strong finish can redeem a rough journey, but, on the other hand, it can distort reality. People may stay in toxic relationships because they remember the good times and the reconciliation at the end of fights, ignoring the suffering in between. They may overvalue fleeting highs while dismissing long stretches of unhappiness. The peak end rule teaches us to be intentional with our stories. If the mind remembers the peaks and the endings, then creating memorable highs and graceful closures can shape how life is recalled. But it also reminds us not to be fooled. Memory is selective. The story your brain tells you about the past is not the full truth. It's just the highlights reel. Contrast effect. The contrast effect is the bias where our judgments are influenced by comparisons, not absolute reality. Something may appear better or worse depending on what it's compared against. A house may seem huge only because you viewed a smaller one first. A meal may taste amazing only because the last one was bland. The mind rarely evaluates things in isolation. It judges by contrast. This effect is exploited everywhere. Marketers show you an overpriced item first, so the slightly cheaper one feels like a bargain. Employers might present a mediocre candidate before a stronger one, making the latter shine even more. In relationships, someone may seem incredibly attractive, not because of who they are, but because of who they're standing next to. The contrast effect warps perception, making us overvalue or undervalue things simply based on sequence. What feels expensive, tasty, or beautiful is often not about the thing itself, but about the comparison that came before it. But beyond manipulation, the contrast effect reveals a deeper truth. Perspective shapes reality. Happiness, for instance, is often relative. You may feel poor compared to a billionaire, but wealthy compared to someone with less. You may feel unattractive next to a model, but confident in another setting. Our satisfaction is less about absolute status and more about who we measure ourselves against. The key lesson is awareness. The contrast effect is inevitable, but when you pause and ask, am I judging this on its own merit or in comparison to something else? You free yourself from illusion. Life becomes clearer when you stop measuring it against distorted mirrors and start seeing it as it really is. Social loafing. Social loafing is the phenomenon where people put in less effort when working in groups than when working alone. The larger the group, the easier it is to hide, and the more tempting it becomes to slack off, trusting that others will pick up the slack. Effort becomes diluted, responsibility spread thin, and the group suffers as a result. Think of group projects in school. There's always at least one person who coasts, doing little while others carry the weight. In workplaces, teams sometimes underperform because individuals assume their contribution doesn't matter. The anonymity of groups makes people feel less accountable, and effort decreases as group size increases. But social loafing isn't always about laziness. Sometimes it stems from invisibility. When people feel their individual work won't be recognized, they disengage. Sometimes it comes from lack of trust, believing that no matter how hard they work, others won't match the effort, so why bother? The danger is that social loafing breeds mediocrity. It erodes motivation, fuels resentment, and weakens collective potential. A team is only as strong as its commitment, and when people withdraw effort, everyone loses. The antidote is clarity and accountability. When individuals see that their contributions matter and are visible, effort rises. When leaders assign clear roles, people feel responsible, and when the purpose of the group is inspiring, members are less likely to hide in the crowd. Social loafing teaches us that groups don't automatically create strength. They create the possibility of strength. Real collaboration requires personal accountability, A team doesn't succeed because of numbers, but because every individual shows up as if the whole depends on them. Because, in truth, it does. Learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is the devastating state where a person stops trying to change their situation because they've been conditioned to believe their actions don't matter. It happens when repeated failure or punishment teaches the brain that no matter what effort is made, the outcome will always be the same. Over time, the will to fight, to soar, to resist, to hope, fades. People stop escaping cages even when the door is open. This concept was first studied in animals. Dogs placed in a situation where shocks were unavoidable eventually stopped trying to avoid them, even when escape later became possible. They had learned helplessness, the belief that nothing they did could change the outcome. Humans experience the same in different ways. A student who repeatedly fails exams may stop studying altogether, convinced they're just not smart. Someone trapped in an abusive relationship may stop trying to leave, believing there's no escape. A person stuck in poverty may abandon dreams, feeling powerless against the system. The tragedy is that the helplessness isn't always real, it's learned. The cage often exists more in the mind than in reality. Yet the effects are powerful: depression, passivity, apathy, and a loss of self-worth. People who believe they're powerless act powerless, and their inaction reinforces the belief, creating a vicious cycle. But the truth is, even small acts of agency can shatter the cycle. The first step is awareness, recognizing that helplessness is often an illusion created by repeated setbacks. The second step is action, starting small, regaining confidence by reclaiming control in small areas of life. Over time, these victories rebuild belief in one's ability to influence outcomes. Learned helplessness is not a life sentence. It's a learned behavior, and what is learned can be unlearned. The antidote is empowerment, proving to yourself again and again that your actions matter. Because they do. Self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is the cycle where a belief or expectation shapes behavior in ways that make the belief come true. When you expect failure, you unconsciously act in ways that lead to failure. When you expect success, you carry yourself with confidence that attracts it. Beliefs don't just describe reality, they create it. This plays out everywhere. A student who believes they're bad at math may approach problems with hesitation, avoid asking questions, and study less, confirming the belief when they score poorly. An employee who thinks their boss dislikes them may act distant, creating tension that makes the boss actually pull away. In relationships, if you expect rejection, you might act nervously or defensively, pushing others away, and then use the rejection as proof of your original belief. The danger of self-fulfilling prophecies is that they trap people in cycles of their own making. Beliefs become prisons, not because they were true at first, but because they were believed so strongly that they shaped reality. Negative prophecies breed failure, while positive ones can breed growth. But here lies the power. If beliefs can destroy, they can also build. A person who believes in their potential approaches challenges with energy and persistence, making success more likely. Leaders who believe in their teams inspire higher performance. Teachers who believe in their students ignite hidden potential. The self-fulfilling prophecy teaches us that thoughts are not passive, they are active forces. What you expect, you often invite. What you believe, you often build. The challenge is to choose carefully which prophecies you allow to guide you, because every expectation you hold is a seed planted in the soil of your future, and eventually, those seeds grow into the reality you live. Temporal discounting. Temporal discounting is the tendency to value immediate rewards more highly than future ones, even when the future rewards are greater. It's why people choose a small pleasure now over a bigger payoff later. We crave instant gratification, discounting the future as if it matters less. This is why saving money is difficult, why diets fail, and why procrastination thrives. The chocolate today feels more valuable than the health benefits years later. This bias is deeply human. Our ancestors lived in uncertain environments where survival depended on taking resources when they appeared. The future was never guaranteed, so immediate rewards made sense. But in the modern world, this instinct often sabotages us. We spend instead of investing, we scroll instead of studying, we indulge instead of building discipline. The short-term wins feel satisfying, but the long-term losses pile up silently. The danger of temporal discounting is that it robs the future self to feed the present self. Over time, this creates regret. We look back and wish we had chosen differently, that we had sacrificed a little now for a greater tomorrow. Yet, in the moment, the pull of now is nearly irresistible. The way to fight it is to make the future feel real. Visualization helps. Picture the person you want to be 5 years from now. Give that version of yourself a face, a voice, a presence. Then realize that your choices today are shaping them. Every dollar saved, every workout completed, every distraction resisted is a gift to your future self. Temporal discounting is powerful, but so is foresight. The key is remembering that the future is not some stranger, it's you. Illusion of transparency. The illusion of transparency is the belief that our thoughts, feelings, and emotions are more obvious to others than they really are. You may feel nervous giving a speech, convinced that everyone sees your shaking hands and racing heart, when in truth, most people notice nothing. You may think your guilt, fear, or embarrassment is written on your face, but others are usually too focused on themselves to detect it. This illusion makes us overly self-conscious. We assume people can read us, so we hold back, fearing exposure. It fuels social anxiety, performance fear, and hesitation in relationships. The truth is, people aren't mind readers. They don't know your insecurities unless you reveal them. The spotlight you think is on you rarely exists. Others are busy worrying about their own spotlight. The danger is that this illusion magnifies vulnerability. A small mistake feels catastrophic because you assume everyone noticed. An awkward silence feels humiliating because you think it's painfully obvious. Yet, most people forget within seconds. The illusion of transparency exaggerates your flaws in your own mind while barely registering in others. The lesson is liberating. You are not as exposed as you think. Your emotions may feel intense, but they are rarely visible to others. This realization frees you to take risks, to speak, to act boldly without the constant fear of judgment. The world isn't scrutinizing you as harshly as you believe, and that freedom can give you the courage to live more fully. Belief perseverance. Belief perseverance is the stubborn tendency to cling to beliefs even when confronted with clear evidence against them. Once the mind accepts something as true, it resists change, bending facts to fit the belief rather than adjusting the belief to fit the facts. This is why misinformation spreads so deeply, and why arguments rarely change people's minds. Consider someone who believes in a conspiracy. Even when evidence disproves it, they may claim the evidence itself is part of the cover-up. Or think of people who hold prejudices. Even when confronted with counterexamples, they dismiss them as exceptions. Belief perseverance locks the mind into rigidity, turning belief into armor against truth. The danger is that it creates blind spots. When we refuse to let go of false or outdated beliefs, we limit growth, relationships, and opportunities. Belief perseverance can damage societies too, as entire groups cling to ideas proven harmful, delaying progress for generations. Yet, this phenomenon also reveals something profound about human nature. Beliefs are not just thoughts, they're identities. To challenge someone's belief is to challenge their sense of self. That's why it feels threatening, and why change is so hard. The antidote is humility, the willingness to say, I might be wrong, the openness to evidence, even when it hurts, the courage to let go of comforting illusions for the sake of deeper truth. Belief perseverance shows how sticky ideas can be, but it also reminds us that growth begins when we loosen our grip. Wisdom isn't in never being wrong, it's in being willing to outgrow the wrong and embrace the truth. Choice overload. Choice overload, also called the paradox of choice, is the psychological burden that comes from having too many options. At first, variety feels empowering. The more choices we have, the more freedom we think we gain. But when the options multiply beyond what we can comfortably process, that freedom turns into paralysis. Instead of feeling excited, we feel overwhelmed. Think of standing in a supermarket aisle with dozens of nearly identical cereal boxes, or scrolling endlessly through movies on a streaming service, only to give up without watching anything. Too many choices create hesitation, second-guessing, and dissatisfaction. Even after choosing, we often feel regret, wondering if another option would have been better. This overload doesn't just apply to products. It seeps into careers, relationships, and lifestyles. Modern life offers countless paths, but the sheer volume of options often paralyzes people. Instead of boldly choosing, they delay, fearing regret, and those who do choose sometimes feel less satisfied, because the abundance of alternatives makes them wonder what they missed out on. The danger is that choice overload wastes time, drains mental energy, and fosters dissatisfaction. People think they want infinite freedom, but what they truly crave is clarity. The most meaningful lives aren't built on endless options, but on deliberate choices. The lesson is powerful. Fewer, clearer choices often bring more peace than endless variety. Discipline in decision-making creates freedom from regret. The next time you face overwhelming options, remember, the secret to happiness is not choosing everything, but choosing what truly matters. Endowment Effect. The endowment effect is the tendency to place more value on things simply because we own them. A mug feels ordinary on a store shelf, but once it's yours, its value in your eyes increases. Ownership creates attachment, and attachment distorts perception of worth. This bias shows up everywhere. People cling to old clothes they never wear because they feel too valuable to throw away. Investors hold on to failing stocks, convinced they're worth more than the market says. Homeowners overprice their houses because to them, every corner holds personal meaning. The endowment effect convinces us that possession equals value. At its core, this bias reveals the deep emotional link between identity and ownership. When we own something, it becomes part of our story. Selling it or letting it go feels like losing a piece of ourselves. But the danger is that this attachment blinds us to reality. We overvalue the old and resist letting go, even when moving forward would serve us better. The endowment effect is why decluttering is so difficult, why people hoard possessions, why companies exploit free trials. Once you use a product, it feels harder to give up, because psychologically, it feels like yours. The antidote is perspective. When deciding whether to keep something, ask yourself, if I didn't own this already, how much would I pay to get it? That question exposes the illusion. The endowment effect teaches us that ownership can cloud judgment, and freedom often comes not from holding on, but from letting go. Law of Effect. The law of effect, proposed by Edward Thorndike, is the principle that behaviors followed by positive outcomes are more likely to be repeated, while behaviors followed by negative outcomes are less likely to occur again. Simply put, rewards reinforce, punishments weaken. This law is the foundation of much of modern psychology, including how habits are formed and how behavior is shaped. Think of training a dog. Reward it with treats for sitting, and it learns to sit more often. Punish it harshly, and fear may silence behavior, but also damage trust. Humans are no different. A child praised for effort works harder. An employee recognized for achievement becomes more motivated. Conversely, when effort goes unnoticed, motivation fades. The law of effect explains why environments that reward growth thrive, and those that punish harshly without reward breed fear and stagnation. But this principle isn't only external, it operates within our minds too. Every time you accomplish a task and feel satisfaction, your brain reinforces that behavior. Every time procrastination brings relief, even temporarily, your brain reinforces avoidance. Habits, good or bad, are shaped by the rewards tied to them. The danger is that people often reward the wrong behaviors. They feed short-term comfort at the cost of long-term growth. They reinforce fear instead of courage, distraction instead of focus. Over time, this sculpts a life of reactive patterns rather than intentional progress. The lesson of the law of effect is simple yet profound. What you reward, you grow. This applies to yourself, your relationships, your work, and your community. Praise and encouragement can transform people. Punishment may suppress, but reward inspires. And the life you live tomorrow is being shaped right now by the reinforcements you choose today. Pavlovian Conditioning. Pavlovian conditioning, also called classical conditioning, is the process of learning through association. It was first discovered by Ivan Pavlov, who noticed that dogs began to salivate not just when they saw food, but also when they heard the footsteps of the person who usually fed them. Over time, a neutral stimulus, like a sound, became linked to food, and the dogs responded automatically. This discovery changed psychology forever, showing how much a behavior is shaped by learned associations. But Pavlovian conditioning isn't just about dogs. It shapes human behavior every day. When you hear your phone notification, your brain floods with anticipation before you even check it. When you smell popcorn, you instantly think of movies. Advertisers use this constantly, pairing products with music, beauty, or status so that we associate the brand with pleasure. Slowly, we learn to respond emotionally, not logically. The danger is that these associations can trap us. A song tied to heartbreak can make us cry years later. Trauma linked to a smell or sound can trigger fear long after the danger is gone. Our brains build automatic links that bypass conscious thought, steering behavior in ways we don't always understand. But Pavlovian conditioning also offers power. By deliberately creating new associations, we can rewire ourselves. Pairing healthy habits with rewards builds positive routines. Associating calm breathing with stress helps train relaxation. Just as the brain learns fear, it can learn freedom. Pavlov showed us that behavior is not fixed, it is conditioned. And what can be conditioned can also be unconditioned. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning, developed by B.F. Skinner, expands on Pavlov's work by focusing not just on associations, but on consequences. It's the principle that behaviors followed by rewards are strengthened, and those followed by punishments are weakened. Unlike classical conditioning, which is passive, operant conditioning is active. We act, and the world responds, shaping whether we repeat the behavior. Think of a child who cleans their room and gets praise. They're more likely to clean again. Or a worker who receives a bonus for high performance. Conversely, if a child is scolded for misbehavior, they may avoid it in the future. Skinner described 4 types of conditioning: positive reinforcement, adding rewards; negative reinforcement, removing discomfort; punishment, adding pain; and extinction, withholding reinforcement until behavior fades. Together, these principles explain much of how habits form and break. Operant conditioning governs everyday life. Why do people keep checking social media? Because likes and comments act as unpredictable rewards, like a slot machine. Why do bad habits persist? Because they often provide instant reinforcement, like comfort eating or procrastination. The brain craves reward, even if the long-term outcome is harmful. The lesson here is powerful. If you want to change behavior, change the consequences. Reward the actions you want more of. Remove reinforcement for the ones you don't. Success in life often isn't about willpower alone. It's about designing systems of reinforcement. Operant conditioning reminds us that discipline isn't built in a vacuum. It's built in an environment that rewards the right choices consistently. Mimetic Desire. Mimetic desire is the theory, developed by René Girard, that human desires are not entirely our own. We learn what to want by imitating others. We don't just want objects, we want them because others want them. Desire is contagious, spreading through observation and imitation. Think of fashion trends. A shirt becomes desirable not because of its fabric, but because celebrities or peers wear it. Or, consider how rivalry begins. 2 people might want the same object, not for its value, but because the other desires it. Even in careers, relationships, or lifestyles, much of what we chase is shaped not by pure individuality, but by mimicking the desires of those around us. The danger of mimetic desire is that it fuels envy, competition, and emptiness. People chase dreams that aren't truly theirs, only to achieve them and feel hollow. They compare constantly, mistaking borrowed desires for authentic ones. Entire societies are built on this cycle. Advertising thrives by showing us what others desire, convincing us to want the same. But mimetic desire can also be a teacher. It shows us how deeply interconnected humans are. It pushes us to reflect. Do I truly want this, or do I want it because someone else does? The more we become aware of this pattern, the more we can resist blindly copying and begin discovering desires that are authentically ours. The truth is, freedom isn't in wanting everything. It's in knowing why you want what you want. Mimetic desire shapes us all, but self-awareness allows us to separate imitation from authenticity. Only then can we build a life based on real passion instead of borrowed longing. Temporal self-discontinuity. Temporal self-discontinuity is the psychological phenomenon where people see their future selves as strangers. We often feel disconnected from who we'll be 5, 10, or 20 years from now, treating that version of ourselves almost like another person. This explains why we make choices that benefit the present at the expense of the future, because deep down, we don't fully identify with the future me. Think about procrastination. You delay work today, telling yourself that your future self will handle it. Or consider money. Many spend recklessly, assuming that future me will somehow figure out the debt. Even with health, we indulge in habits that hurt the long term, as if those consequences belong to someone else. Temporal self-discontinuity disconnects us from accountability because we see the future self as another person's problem. The danger of this mindset is obvious. It erodes responsibility, creates cycles of regret, and prevents long-term growth. By neglecting the future self, we build lives of short-term comfort but long-term suffering. It's the reason so many people wake up years later wondering why their health, finances, or relationships have collapsed. But here's the powerful truth. Your future self is not a stranger. It's you, just further along. Every choice you make today is a gift or a burden you're handing to yourself tomorrow. One way to bridge this gap is through visualization. Imagine meeting your older self. Would they thank you or resent you? By strengthening your connection to the future, you cultivate accountability in the present. Temporal self-discontinuity teaches us that growth isn't just about discipline, it's about empathy for yourself. Treat your future self with the same care you'd show a loved one, because one day, that stranger will be the one living with the consequences of your decisions. Delayed gratification. Delayed gratification is the ability to resist the lure of immediate pleasure in order to gain a greater reward later. It's the discipline to say no to the short term so you can say yes to the long term. This concept was famously tested in the marshmallow experiment, where children were given a choice: eat one marshmallow now or wait and receive two later. The children who waited tended to have better outcomes in education, health, and life decades later. This principle is at the heart of success. Every meaningful achievement, building wealth, mastering a skill, creating a strong body, or nurturing a relationship, requires sacrifice in the moment for a reward in the future. Delayed gratification is the bridge between where you are and where you want to be. But resisting instant pleasure is incredibly hard in today's world. Technology, entertainment, and advertising bombard us with constant rewards. Likes, notifications, fast food, streaming, shopping. Society trains us for impatience. Waiting feels unbearable when gratification is one click away. Yet, the cost of constant indulgence is steep. Debt, distraction, shallow relationships, and wasted potential. The power of delayed gratification lies not in deprivation, but in direction. You're not saying no forever. You're saying no for now so you can say yes to something greater. The discipline to delay is the discipline to build. Every time you resist an impulse, you're investing in your future. The truth is simple. Success favors those who can wait. Delayed gratification teaches you that patience isn't weakness, it's strength, because the one who can sacrifice today holds the keys to tomorrow's rewards. Yerkes-Dodson Law. The Yerkes-Dodson Law describes the relationship between stress and performance. It shows that a moderate level of stress or arousal actually improves focus and efficiency, but too little stress leads to laziness, and too much stress causes burnout. In short, the right amount of pressure fuels growth, but extremes destroy it. Think of students before an exam. A little anxiety sharpens their focus, pushing them to study. Too little stress, and they procrastinate. Too much stress and panic paralyzes them. Athletes experience the same. The adrenaline of competition boosts performance, but overwhelming pressure can cripple it. The Yerkes-Dodson curve reminds us that balance matters. We need enough challenge to grow, but not so much that it breaks us. This law applies to life as a whole. Work, relationships, creativity, all thrive on a balance between calm and challenge. Growth comes from stepping into discomfort, but collapse comes from drowning in it. Too much ease breeds stagnation. Too much strain breeds destruction. The sweet spot lies in the middle, where pressure is a catalyst, not a cage. The danger is that many people misunderstand stress. They see all of it as harmful, when in reality, the right amount of stress is fuel. Avoiding stress completely keeps you weak. Embracing too much leaves you broken. The art of life is finding the zone where stress sharpens you without consuming you. The Yerkes-Dodson Law teaches us that pressure itself is not the enemy. The enemy is imbalance. The goal is not to eliminate stress, but to master it, to ride the wave instead of being crushed by it. Paradox of choice. The paradox of choice is the strange reality that while having some choice increases freedom and happiness, having too many choices can lead to paralysis, dissatisfaction, and regret. Modern life bombards us with endless options: careers, relationships, gadgets, foods, even identities. At first glance, this abundance feels empowering, but instead of bringing peace, it often leaves people anxious, second-guessing every decision. Imagine standing in a store with 200 brands of toothpaste. Instead of feeling lucky, you feel overwhelmed. Which is the healthiest? Which is the best value? What if you choose wrong? The weight of so many options drains joy. Even after deciding, you might feel regret, wondering if another choice would have been better. This paradox extends beyond shopping. It influences careers. With countless paths, many delay choosing at all. It shapes relationships. Dating apps offer endless potential partners, leaving people hesitant to commit, fearing someone better is one swipe away. It infiltrates lifestyles. People spend years bouncing between options, never fully satisfied, because the illusion of more always lingers. The danger of the paradox of choice is that it teaches us to chase perfection. We think the right choice will eliminate regret, but in reality, no choice is flawless. The more options we have, the harder it becomes to accept imperfection. And so, instead of enjoying freedom, we drown in it. The lesson is clarity. Happiness doesn't come from infinite options, but from committing to the ones that truly matter. Less isn't just more, less is freedom. When you simplify, when you focus, when you stop chasing every possibility, you gain something priceless: peace. Default effect. The default effect is the tendency for people to stick with preset options, even when alternatives are available. Our brains prefer the path of least resistance, so whatever is chosen by default often feels like the natural choice. This effect explains why small design decisions, like what's automatically checked in a box or what's pre-selected on a form, can shape huge outcomes. Think of organ donation rates. In countries where donation is the default unless you opt out, participation rates are drastically higher than in countries where you must actively opt in. Not because people feel differently, but because defaults steer behavior. The same applies to retirement savings, subscription renewals, even app settings. The danger is that defaults can quietly control lives. Companies exploit this by setting auto-renew as the norm, trapping people in services they didn't consciously choose. Technology platforms preset privacy options in ways that benefit themselves, not the user. People often go along, not out of agreement, but out of inertia. But the default effect also shows us something powerful. Environments shape choices as much as willpower does. If you want to improve your life, set your own defaults. Place healthy food in easy reach. Set savings to automatic. Fill your calendar with what matters most. When good habits are the default, growth becomes effortless. The default effect teaches us that the small details in our environment often matter more than we realize. The defaults you accept today shape the life you live tomorrow. So, the question is, who is setting your defaults? You or someone else? Attentional bias. Attentional bias is the tendency for our minds to focus on certain stimuli while ignoring others, often based on emotions, fears, or desires. What we notice is not always what is most important. It's what aligns with our current mindset. A person afraid of rejection may see only signs of disapproval, ignoring acceptance. Someone obsessed with wealth may notice only money-related details while overlooking deeper connections. Our attention filters reality. This bias can distort life in dangerous ways. A person with anxiety fixates on potential threats, magnifying fear. Someone grieving sees constant reminders of loss, even in neutral settings. People in love notice every small sign of affection, interpreting it as proof of meaning. Attentional bias shapes not just perception, but emotion, because where focus goes, energy follows. Marketers exploit this bias. They design ads to capture attention in ways that align with our desires: beauty, status, power, pleasure. Once our attention is hooked, everything else fades into the background. Similarly, politics manipulates attentional bias by highlighting specific issues, steering focus away from others. But attentional bias also has a lesson. Your reality is built on what you choose to notice. If you constantly focus on negativity, your world feels darker. If you train your attention toward gratitude, opportunities, and growth, your reality brightens. Attention is like a spotlight. What it shines on grows in importance, while everything else fades into shadow. The challenge is not to eliminate attentional bias. It's inevitable. The challenge is to master it. By training your focus intentionally, you can rewrite the story your mind tells you about life. Attention, in the end, is power, because what you notice becomes the world you live in. Habituation. Habituation is the psychological process where repeated exposure to the same stimulus reduces our response to it. In simple terms, the more familiar something becomes, the less we notice it. A new smell in your home might seem overwhelming at first, but within minutes, you barely register it. A sound that once startled you eventually fades into the background. Our brains are wired to filter out repetition, saving energy for what's new and unexpected. But this principle doesn't just apply to senses, it applies to life. The excitement of a new car, a new house, or even a new relationship eventually fades. What once thrilled you becomes ordinary. Habituation is why people keep chasing novelty, upgrading gadgets, changing jobs, or seeking new thrills, because the old loses its sparkle. It's also why gratitude can slip away. Blessings turn invisible once they become routine. The danger of habituation is that it blinds us to what truly matters. We stop appreciating what we once longed for. We overlook love, comfort, and security simply because they're constant. It numbs us, pushing us to endlessly chase more, while ignoring the treasures we already hold. Yet, habituation has a flip side. It protects us from being overwhelmed by the world. Without it, every sound, sight, and sensation would demand attention, leaving us exhausted. Habituation gives us the gift of focus, allowing us to adapt and survive. The lesson is awareness. You cannot stop habituation, but you can interrupt it by practicing presence. Pause to notice the things you take for granted, the smile of someone you love, the roof over your head, the food on your table. By resetting your attention, you break through the dullness of familiarity. Habituation teaches us this paradox. What becomes ordinary is often extraordinary, if only we choose to see it again. Mirror neuron response. Mirror neurons are brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we see someone else perform it. This mirror neuron response is the foundation of empathy, imitation, and learning. When you see someone smile, your brain activates the same pathways as if you were smiling yourself. When you watch a sports player leap, your body almost flinches with them. Our brains mirror the experiences of others, making us deeply connected on a neurological level. This response explains why emotions are contagious. A yawn spreads through a room because our brains simulate the act. Laughter ripples through crowds because seeing joy activates our own circuits of joy. It's why we feel sadness watching someone cry, or tension watching a movie character in danger. Mirror neurons bridge the gap between self and other, letting us experience the world through someone else's body. But the mirror neuron response is double-edged. It makes empathy possible, but also fuels imitation in destructive ways. Children mimic aggression when they see it modeled. Social behaviors spread, whether positive or negative, because our brains are wired to copy. Even habits and mindsets can transfer silently through the people we surround ourselves with. The power of mirror neurons is profound. They remind us that we are not isolated individuals, but interconnected beings. Our energy, emotions, and actions ripple outward, shaping the behavior of others. This means we must choose our influences carefully, because what we see, we absorb. And equally, we must live consciously, because what others see in us, they mirror. Mirror neurons whisper a truth. We are walking reflections of one another. If you want to change the world around you, begin by embodying the change yourself. Altruistic punishment. Altruistic punishment is the phenomenon where people punish rule breakers or cheaters, even at a personal cost, to uphold fairness in society. It seems irrational at first. Why would someone sacrifice their own resources to punish another? But this instinct runs deep in human psychology. Communities survive on cooperation, and punishing those who exploit others protects the group as a whole. Consider a person who reports corruption, even though it risks their career. Or someone who intervenes in public when they see injustice, knowing it could endanger them. These acts may not benefit the individual directly, but they strengthen the rules of fairness, protecting the collective. Altruistic punishment is why societies function. It enforces accountability when selfishness threatens stability. Yet, this instinct can also breed conflict. Sometimes punishment turns into revenge, blurring justice with personal anger. Sometimes people punish out of pride rather than true fairness. And in some cases, the act of punishing costs more than it saves. But the existence of altruistic punishment reveals something extraordinary about humanity. We are wired not just for self-interest, but for collective survival. Deep within us lies a sense of justice so strong that we will pay a price to defend it. This is why people protest oppression, expose lies, and demand fairness, even when they suffer for it. The lesson is profound. Fairness matters more than comfort. Altruistic punishment teaches us that justice is not just an abstract idea. It's an instinct born from the need to preserve trust. Without it, cooperation collapses. With it, societies flourish. Sometimes, paying a price to protect fairness isn't just noble, it's necessary. Egocentric bias. Egocentric bias is the tendency to overestimate our own role in events, assuming that situations revolve around us more than they actually do. It's why people often believe they contributed more to a group project than they did, or why they think others are paying closer attention to their mistakes than they really are. Deep down, the human brain views reality through a self-centered lens, filtering the world from the perspective of me first. This bias can distort memory. People recall events in ways that exaggerate their own involvement, remembering themselves as the hero of a story, or assuming that outcomes hinged on their actions. It also skews relationships, as people often assume their feelings or efforts are more significant than those of others. Egocentric bias whispers, "I mattered more than I truly did." The danger of this bias is that it breeds misunderstanding, conflict, and arrogance. In teams, everyone feels they worked the hardest, causing resentment. In relationships, people feel underappreciated because they overestimate their contributions compared to their partners. Even in failures, egocentric bias can magnify shame, because people assume others noticed or judged them more than they actually did. Yet, there's a softer truth here too. Egocentric bias reveals how central identity is to the human experience. Each of us lives inside our own story, and it's natural to see the world through that lens. The challenge is to step outside of it, to remember that others have their own equally vivid perspectives. The lesson of egocentric bias is humility. The world doesn't revolve around us, but it also doesn't ignore us completely. By balancing self-awareness with empathy, we learn to see not just our own role, but the roles of those around us. That shift transforms relationships, teams, and even how we remember our lives. Illusion of control. The illusion of control is the belief that we have more influence over outcomes than we actually do. Humans crave certainty, and when faced with randomness or chance, we convince ourselves that our actions can bend reality. A gambler might believe they can control dice by throwing them harder. Someone may wear a lucky shirt to sway an exam. Even in daily life, we often act as though rituals or minor choices have power over things far beyond our reach. This illusion can provide comfort. Believing we have control reduces anxiety and gives us a sense of stability in an uncertain world. It explains why people cling to superstitions, rituals, or patterns. They make chaos feel predictable, but the illusion also creates problems. People waste energy trying to control what's uncontrollable while ignoring the things they can control. Gamblers lose fortunes chasing systems. Leaders overestimate their ability to manage outcomes, leading to overconfidence and mistakes. The danger is subtle. The illusion of control narrows vision. It makes people attribute success or failure to personal actions when luck or randomness played a greater role. This blinds us to risk, inflates pride, and deepens despair when things don't go our way. Yet, there is also power in this illusion. Sometimes, believing in control motivates persistence. Athletes perform better when they think their mindset influences results. Even if randomness plays a role, patients recover faster when they feel empowered, even if the control is partial. The illusion of control can be both a trap and a tool. The wisdom lies in balance. Focus on what is truly within your control, your effort, your mindset, your choices, and release the rest. The illusion may comfort you, but real strength comes from knowing where control ends and acceptance begins. Normative conformity. Normative conformity is the tendency to change behavior to fit into a group, not because we believe the group is right, but because we fear rejection. It's the instinct to laugh at a joke you don't find funny, to dress a certain way to match peers, or to stay silent in a meeting even when you disagree. Humans are wired for belonging, and the cost of standing apart often feels greater than the cost of staying quiet. This conformity can be harmless in small doses, like following social customs or adjusting to group dynamics, but it becomes dangerous when it silences truth or stifles individuality. Entire societies have committed injustices because individuals conformed out of fear. From historical atrocities to everyday bullying, normative conformity keeps people complicit by pressuring them to fit in. The psychology behind it is ancient. For our ancestors, survival often depended on group acceptance. To be cast out meant danger. That instinct lingers today, making rejection feel unbearable. So we conform, even when it betrays our values. But conformity isn't always negative. Sometimes it creates unity, harmony, and cooperation. Shared norms allow communities to function smoothly. The danger arises when conformity demands silence in the face of wrong, or when it suffocates individuality. The lesson of normative conformity is courage. Belonging is important, but it should never come at the cost of authenticity. True growth happens when you dare to stand apart, even if it risks disapproval. History's greatest changes came not from those who conformed, but from those who resisted. Normative conformity teaches us that fitting in may feel safe, but it's the outsiders who change the world. Cultural lag. Cultural lag is the phenomenon where society's values, beliefs, and laws evolve more slowly than technology or innovation. It's the gap between what we are capable of doing and what we are ready to accept. For example, we created social media before we understood its psychological impact. We developed genetic engineering before we fully debated its ethical boundaries. Technology races ahead, while culture struggles to catch up. This lag creates tension. New tools change how we live, but old traditions and systems resist. Cars reshaped cities long before laws adapted to regulate traffic. The internet transformed communication faster than governments could create policies for digital privacy. Artificial intelligence is advancing today more quickly than our moral frameworks are evolving to manage its power. Cultural lag is the growing pain of progress. The danger is that during this gap, harm spreads unchecked. Technology without ethical guidance can create inequality, exploitation, or chaos. The delay in cultural adaptation often means societies suffer before reforms arrive. Think of climate change. Science warned us decades ago, but culture and politics were too slow to respond. The cost of lag is real. Yet, cultural lag also reveals human nature. We are cautious, resistant to change, and attached to familiar norms. This hesitation sometimes protects us from reckless adoption. But ultimately, progress demands that culture evolve with innovation. The lesson is urgency. We cannot stop technology, but we can speed up wisdom. Cultural lag reminds us that advancement is not just about invention, it's about the maturity to wield invention responsibly. To thrive in the future, humanity must learn not only to create but to adapt. Hyperbolic discounting. Hyperbolic discounting is the tendency to prefer smaller, immediate rewards over larger, delayed ones, even when waiting would bring much greater benefit. It's why someone chooses 50 today over 100 a month from now. It's why diets fail, why people procrastinate, and why saving money feels impossible. The brain inflates the value of the now and discounts the value of the future. This bias is built into our evolution. For early humans, survival meant seizing resources when they appeared. The future was uncertain, so immediate gains were safer. But in modern life, this instinct often sabotages us. We eat the junk food instead of waiting for health. We spend instead of investing. We scroll for short-term pleasure instead of working toward long-term success. The problem with hyperbolic discounting is that it traps us in cycles of regret. We sacrifice tomorrow for today again and again, and the future self suffers the debt, the fatigue, the lost opportunities. The tragedy is that the future self is still us, but by the time we realize it, the damage is often done. But here lies hope. Awareness of this bias can help us fight it. Tools like commitment contracts, habit stacking, or automation allow us to bypass short-term temptation. Visualization strengthens empathy with our future selves, making them feel real, and small victories and delaying gratification build momentum toward bigger wins. Hyperbolic discounting teaches us a hard truth. The battle for success is not fought in the distant future, it's fought in the small choices of today. Every time you resist the pull of now for the sake of later, you're reclaiming power over your destiny. Selective perception. Selective perception is the bias where we notice and interpret information in ways that confirm our existing beliefs, while ignoring or dismissing what contradicts them. It's not just that we filter reality, it's that we bend it. Two people can watch the same event and walk away with completely different interpretations, each convinced they saw the truth. This bias plays out everywhere. In politics, people interpret news stories through the lens of their ideology. In relationships, a person in love may ignore red flags, while someone distrustful may invent problems where none exist. Even in daily life, selective perception filters what we notice. A pregnant woman suddenly sees strollers everywhere, while an investor suddenly sees stock opportunities in every headline. The danger is that selective perception locks us in echo chambers. We stop seeing reality as it is, and instead, we see it as we expect it to be. This not only distorts truth, but also deepens division. Entire societies fracture because groups literally perceive different realities. But selective perception also shows us the incredible power of the mind. Our focus shapes our world. By deliberately training perception, we can shift what we notice. Gratitude journaling, for instance, primes the brain to see blessings instead of problems. Self-awareness practices help break the spell of bias by reminding us that perception is not objective, it's filtered. The lesson of selective perception is humility. Your view of the world is not the world itself, it's your version of it. By widening perception, questioning assumptions, and listening to others, you begin to see more clearly. Selective perception teaches us that this mind is both lens and prison, and awareness is the key that unlocks the bars. Emotional contagion. Emotional contagion is the phenomenon where emotions spread from person to person like a virus. You've felt it before. One person's laughter lights up a room, or one person's anger poisons the air. Without realizing it, we absorb and mirror the moods of those around us. This happens because our brains are wired with mirror neurons and subtle cues that make us synchronize emotionally with others. This contagion is powerful in groups. A team with a positive leader feels motivated and united, while a team under a negative leader sinks into resentment and apathy. Crowds amplify this effect. Joy spreads faster at concerts, fear escalates during panics, outrage multiplies on social media. Emotional contagion shows us that emotions aren't private. They're collective. The danger is that if you surround yourself with toxic people, you absorb their toxicity. If you live in constant exposure to fear, anger, or cynicism, those states become your own. Many people underestimate how much of their mood is simply borrowed from others. They think they're just stressed or just sad, when in reality, they're carrying the emotions of the environment around them. But there's another side. Positive emotions spread just as powerfully. Hope inspires hope. Gratitude creates gratitude. Calmness cools conflict. By consciously cultivating emotional energy, you can lift not only yourself, but everyone in your orbit. The lesson of emotional contagion is responsibility. Your mood is not just your own. It's a signal that spreads. Be mindful of who you absorb from, and be intentional about what you radiate. Because emotions, like viruses, don't stay contained. They move through the world, shaping lives far beyond your own. Group polarization. Group polarization is the tendency for groups to make more extreme decisions than individuals would on their own. When people gather, their opinions often intensify, pushing them further to one side. A group of cautious individuals may become overly conservative together, while a group of risk-takers may become dangerously reckless. The group dynamic amplifies extremes. This happens because people seek belonging. Within a group, members often compete to express stronger versions of the shared belief to gain approval. Meanwhile, dissenting voices stay quiet, creating the illusion that everyone agrees. Over time, this cycle pushes the group toward more radical positions. We see this in politics, where echo chambers drive polarization. Online communities intensify opinions until they spiral into extremism. Even in everyday life, group polarization influences decisions. A business team might approve a riskier strategy together than anyone would have dared alone. The danger is clear. Group polarization magnifies division, erodes balance, and breeds extremism. It blinds people to nuance, making compromise feel like betrayal. History is filled with disasters born not from lone radicals, but from groups that amplified one another's certainty. But there's a lesson here too. Group polarization can be positive when directed wisely. A group of motivated people can amplify courage, generosity, or creativity. Surrounding yourself with ambitious peers can push you to heights you might not reach alone. The key is awareness. Diversity of thought and open dialogue prevent the echo chamber. When groups encourage questioning instead of silencing it, polarization weakens. Group polarization teaches us that the crowd doesn't just reflect us, it shapes us. And what it shapes us into depends on whether we allow it to fuel wisdom or fanaticism. Desensitization. Desensitization is the process where repeated exposure to a stimulus reduces our emotional response to it. The first time we encounter something shocking or intense, it shakes us. But with repetition, the reaction dulls. Violence on television, constant news of tragedy, or repeated warnings can slowly numb us until what once horrified us becomes background noise. This effect explains why people can scroll past headlines of war or disaster with indifference, even though such events should spark outrage. It's not that they don't care, it's that their emotions have been worn down by constant exposure. Desensitization protects us from emotional overload, but it also erodes empathy. The danger is that desensitization can normalize what should never feel normal. Exposure to cruelty, corruption, or injustice can make people shrug instead of resist. Over time, entire societies can grow numb to suffering, allowing harm to continue unchecked. The more we see something, the less shocking it becomes, and the easier it is to ignore. Yet, desensitization isn't always negative. It helps soldiers stay calm in chaos. Doctors perform in crisis, and individuals overcome phobias through gradual exposure. In controlled settings, it can be a tool for resilience, but in uncontrolled settings, it risks hardening hearts and dulling moral urgency. The lesson of desensitization is vigilance. Don't let repetition steal your humanity. Stay sensitive to injustice, suffering, and beauty, even when the world trains you to grow numb, because the moment you stop feeling is the moment you stop acting, and without action, nothing changes.